Okay, there we go. All right, I would like to call the meeting to order for the Zoning Design Review Board of Tuesday, September 13th. You guys like to do a roll call?
Yeah, we'll start with a roll call. Member Tigert? Here. Member Allen?
Here.
Member Laz?
Here.
Vice Chair Dorman? Here. And Chair Cook?
Here.
Let the record show that everyone is here.
Excellent. Can you all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Before we get to adoption of the agenda, I'm going to throw it back for a second to Sandra.
Well, we are pleased to announce a new employee in our department, and this is Curtis Sawyer. He's a recent graduate of Sonoma State, and he's already jumping in and helping out on a lot of much-needed projects and help. So we're really happy to have him, and we've had him a week.
Oh, wow. Welcome, Curtis. Thank you. Any changes to the agenda before we adopt it? Somebody like to motion to adopt it?
We adopt the agenda.
And a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, we've adopted the agenda. Did everybody get a chance to review the minutes from June 14th and the minutes from August 9th?
Yes.
And did you find any discrepancies or anything you want to clarify?
I had a question on June 14th, under item 7, public hearings of 6805 John Street. The motion by Chair Cook, I looked back at my notes and I thought her motion was a 3-foot fence, and then Member Allen's 4-foot fence, and then ultimately it was approved as
3 feet.
Or was it approved?
The presented was an 8-foot fence. And so what ultimately was approved was a 3-foot fence with the lattice above it.
I looked back at the drawing and it was 2 feet of board and 3 feet of hog wire.
Which would have been a 5-foot fence. And that was not approved.
Okay.
It was not.
What was approved was a 3-foot fence that could have been either of the materials. We left that up to the applicant. The board decided to leave that up to the applicant.
So still, the project as presented was not a 3-foot fence. Am I correct on that?
Correct.
So, motion to approve the project as presented was not the motion.
That was not the motion. The language should be the same as the first motion by Chair Cook, so that can be edited.
Okay.
So what we approved was the 3-foot fence.
Correct.
And somehow that needs to be both in the first motion that did not get a second and in the final motion that passed.
Correct.
So that change should be made.
I will do that.
Wow. Good catch.
And I am going to abstain because I would like to just see the findings before I vote. How the findings clarified all that. So
On that. Okay.
On that. So.
Okay. So we will put the approval of the minutes for August 9th on hold?
No, I think y'all can go ahead
June
and vote.
14th.
I'm just telling you why I will abstain.
Oh, okay, I get it. So somebody make a motion to approve the minutes? I'll make a motion to approve the minutes. Would somebody second that? No?
Which minutes
We're approving the minutes, and then she's going to abstain. from the
I'll
vote.
second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And all opposed? One abstention?
And I abstain.
Okay.
Yes.
From both minutes, June and August, because we lumped them as one action, correct?
Oh, we did, because I had some other comments to the August minutes.
So that's
Okay.
fine. Just that was all for June then?
That's for June.
Okay.
Okay, and the August 9th minutes then?
So on August 9th, this was just a clarification that came to me as I was reading this of all of our minutes. When we have minutes and we put approval of minutes for example, in August we had none. Should we, as a practice matter, do something consistent that says no minutes were presented for approval and no members of the public came forward to comment, rather than just leaving an item that doesn't tell what we did or didn't do? And I just throw that out. Specifically on item 8 on the public hearings, I'd like to see a little more definition of the drawing of the straws. So my suggestion is, in order to make a quorum in keeping with town practices, the conflicted members drew straws and member Laz remained, to give an explanation of why we did it that way, and to say that is our habit and practice to handle it that way. And on item 8, when we talked about number 10, Redwood Drive, I didn't know if we needed to indicate that Chair Cook had left the room, or if recusal indicates that she also left the room. And on the final item, number 9, appointment to the General Plan Ad Hoc Committee, I would like to say it's CSA after discussion, members were appointed, so that the minutes do reflect there was discussion of the item. And I'm open to suggestion or being ruled down on those.
No, I think a little more detail is never a bad thing. Anybody have any comments?
Agreed? No,
Yeah.
that works.
Okay. Does that sound all right? We put a
Yeah,
little
we,
more
we
detail
can make those adjustments.
in our minutes.
Regarding the June one, because it just said with the conditions of approval as presented, one of the conditions of approval was the fence shall be 3 feet tall.
Good.
So that's why it just said with the
Sorry.
presented conditions of approval.
Obviously, I didn't look far enough.
No, that's
I
just.
only looked at the staff report. Thank you. Good.
Okay. But we can definitely provide more detail in the August minutes, as Vice Chair Dorman has suggested, if that's the will of the board.
Okay. I think, Karen, you agree?
Yes.
Okay. So somebody want to make a motion to approve the minutes of August 9th with the corrections? Well, that sort of is a motion.
So I make a motion to approve the minutes of August 9th with the revisions as discussed.
I'll second.
All in favor? All approved? Aye. All opposed? No one? Okay. Those are approved with the adjustments. Is there anybody here for public comment for items not on the agenda tonight? Okie doke. Then we will move on. There were no public interested in coming out to make a comment. We will move on to the public hearings. Number 16-922 for 6752 Washington Street, the master sign plan for Stuart Cellars Complex.
Wonderful. Well, Board, before you this evening is an application for a master sign permit package for the Stuart Cellars Complex that recently opened in town. The plan includes 5 new signs that total 12.58 square feet altogether, which is detailed in your staff report as well as on the table on the screen. To summarize, the signs include a double-sided projecting blade sign, pretty much coming out the side of the cafe building. On the back of the sidewalk, it's composed of a black and metal sign panel with a 1/8 inch thick flat-cut pin-mounted metal letters in a corten steel rust finish. And that same look is consistent with all of the signs within the presented plan. This projecting blade sign is 3.6 square feet in size, but because it is dual-sided, both sides are counted towards the total sign area of the site. So 7.1 square feet for that one. A wall-mounted metal sign panel on the cafe building that says Stuart Gather Cafe is 1.9 square feet. There's also addresses 6752, which are exempt from the sign area because they are an address. They aren't serving to be signs that promote the businesses they're in. It's simply a location. There's the address. It's under that same line of thinking that the Stuart Cellars guest parking only signs are also not counted towards the master signage plan because it's providing direction for guests and visitors. The Stuart Tasting Hall sign will be located on the wine tasting building on the south side of the property. Will also be wall-mounted and is 1.25 square feet. Then lastly, there's a wall-mounted Nomad Heritage Library sign to be located just off the bookstore, 2.33 square feet. Good. So, and here on this slide shows the general designs of the submitted signs. Now, whenever a new application comes forth for a master sign plan, certain findings need to be made, and these findings are found in section 17.92 of the Yountville Municipal Code. It's within the sign ordinance, and what has been shown in the staff report reflects the recent changes made to the sign ordinance. In subsection J, number 3, it says that the total sign area for a site should be calculated by combining the lineal building footage for structures facing a public street. In other words, you take the lineal footage of the buildings that are facing Washington Street, in Stuart Sellard's case, and take that total footage, how long is it, and divide it by 2. And that is the total permitted square footage for the signs. And that equals 24.4 square feet of signage. They submitted here 12.58 total signage. So completely within their allotted signs for the site. The other findings include that there shall be no more than one freestanding sign per frontage. Really, the only freestanding sign here is the one that is exempt from the master sign plan, the one directing parking to the rear of the parcel. In addition to the freestanding sign allowed for the parcel, each business in a building is requiring a master sign plan is allowed one wall or suspended sign, providing that the total allowable area of said signs is reduced by the square footage of a freestanding sign. And as stated in the staff report there under item number 5 on page 3, says the freestanding parking sign is exempt from the master sign plan calculation for total square footage. Each building is represented by one sign each, the cafe, the library, and the tasting hall. And though the cafe sign is split into 2 panels, as shown here, it really serves the purpose as one sign. So staff is under the impression, and it is of the opinion that the submitted signs completely satisfy the requirements that the code has set for master sign plans. Now, regarding design criteria, which is also in the sign ordinance, states that colors for sign backgrounds must be selected from either an approved town color palette, if adopted by the ZDRB, or from the palette used in other buildings on the same parcel. Staff is of the opinion that the signs are subtle and they're complementary to the design of the buildings with black and metal panels and letters in that steel rust finish. The style not only fits well with the rustic but sophisticated design of the buildings, but also fits with the general aesthetic of the Old Town Commercial District as a whole when you compare this to the other properties around it. There's no extra lighting proposed in the plan, and none of the proposed signs are to be internally illuminated at all. So again, it's staff's opinion that the applicant's plan is in conformance with the general standards for master sign plans, and staff recommends approval of this master sign plan. Now we're here to answer any questions. The applicant is also here if you have any questions for them.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions of staff? Mikhail?
So with the freestanding parking sign, for instance, is that just exempt from the square footage adage, or say they wanted to add a freestanding sign in the future, does that come into effect?
That's exempt because it was listed as an extra condition of approval for the master development of the site. So there are not many, but there are a few parcels in town where the way that it was developed and parking is in the back, there needs to be some kind of signage so people know, hey, there's parking in the back, and it's for guests of this property. Okay. And so that's usually associated with the master development plan and is therefore separate and distinct from the master signage plan.
Got it. And should they decide in the future that they want some sort of illumination on the signs, will that have to be then represented in terms of what the illumination looks like, or is that something that they could just decide, it gets dark at 6 o'clock and no one knows we're still open?
All lighting additions, if they were to do that in the future, would need to conform with the town's light ordinance, which means no light would be permitted to spill onto adjacent parcels or onto the right-of-way so as to, at all.
Okay.
Really, that would become a nuisance. It might disrupt traffic, so it would need to be subtle and stay only within the parameters of that property.
That's all I have.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Barbara, you have any questions?
The colors, what's the criteria for the colors of the design?
Really, the only criteria for colors is that the design needs to be consistent with the property as a whole. Seeing as there is no townwide palette approved yet, it just needs to be the call of the board.
Okay.
Any other questions? Is there any minimum size requirement for the parking sign?
A minimum size? No.
Okay. Karen?
No question.
Carrie?
So on the parking sign, will the applicant be able to come forward and seek another discretionary freestanding sign, or is that the only one the applicant will get?
If they were to add any additional sign to this, they'd need to come forward with an application.
But it would, and I think this was
That's what I was,
something
yeah.
that fell out
That's what
too,
you were trying to-
is would that require a variance, or because the parking sign is required, does it not count as their one freestanding sign that they may have?
You'd really take the parking sign out of it completely. So it's submitted here only in terms that it's a sign on the property that has the same look as the other signs, but when it comes to the square footage with the master sign plan, it's separate.
And since it was required, are there restrictions on its placement and its size? And do we have to make any findings that it doesn't impede visibility or traffic placement? Does there have to be a finding from the CDRB on that?
I don't think it needs a
As there
formal
would be with
finding.
other freestanding sign? No?
I would like to add one thing on the freestanding sign. Since it's a master sign plan property, in addition to each of the wall-mounted signs, they can have a freestanding sign. In this case, they're proposing the additional blade sign to serve the same purpose as the monument, to identify the complex as a whole. So we've analyzed it in terms of them being like for like, and serving the same purpose and intent in terms of the sign ordinance. So if approved as presented, an additional request to add a monument sign would exceed what master sign plan allows.
So this is taking the place, the blade sign is taking the place of the freestanding sign that could identify the development or the businesses.
Yes.
And can we put that in our minutes or findings or something so that
Always, yes.
posterity knows that? Okay. And on the Stuart Gather Cafe, and then the address is going to go on top of that? Is that, or near that somewhere?
It would be on the cafe building facing out towards Washington Street, pretty close to the Stuart Cafe sign.
Okay. So when you did your figures on that, you have 7 5/8 by 22, which is only the Stuart sign. So where do you calculate the Gather Cafe and the space in between them?
Hang on.
He's doing the math in his head.
Yeah,
I'm
hang
impressed.
on.
So I'm thinking you should take 6 1/4 plus 2 plus 7 5/8 by 22 inches, because that's really the sign area.
I agree. Okay. Give me a second, and I'll add that math to
No,
the
I'm
total.
just
It'll
way
still be
under.
within.
Philosophically asking, isn't
No, you would.
Yes.
You would.
we
Yes.
say?
Correct. they'd still be within their allowed square feet for sure, but we will make sure the numbers reflect this.
And we're gonna have both the blade sign and the combo cafe. So on the front of on the Washington side of the cafe, we're gonna have Stuart and Gather Cafe flat, and then we're gonna have a blade sign Stuart, correct?
Yes.
That's all gonna happen on the Washington side of the cafe.
Correct.
Do we need a variance for that because there are 2 signs on that wall?
The
Or
reason,
binding, or do we need to do anything specific for that?
because that building shows the Stuart Gather Cafe, and we're treating that really as one sign, we're calling that the sign for the cafe building. The projecting sign, even though that's visible from Washington Street, it really is for the complex as a whole, rather than just directing people to one particular sign. So serves kind of the same purpose as the freestanding monument signs that you'd see in front of other complexes. And so in looking at it that way, which is reflected in one of the findings here, it would be sufficient. Did that answer your question?
So I just want to make sure we're not setting any precedent that we can have 2 signs on one frontage and that we cover that somehow in the condition of approval, but this is the specific reason we're doing it this way. This is the freestanding sign. We're not saying you can put 2 signs on one building frontage.
Right. If you look at finding number 5 on page 3 of the staff report, it says the projecting Stuart sign is located on the cafe building and serves as a sign for the complex as a whole. Because the development was encouraged to place parking in the rear and bring the building up closer to the sidewalk, therefore decreasing the front setback, a freestanding monument sign that is typical for a master sign plan isn't feasible. The projecting Stuart sign is an appropriate replacement for a monument sign and is within the intent of the master sign plan provisions, as it represents the entire complex while maintaining the subtlety of the plan. And so, visible from the right-of-way, some other businesses, you might see a wall-mounted sign and a monument freestanding sign that lists all the businesses. This one, because the monument sign wouldn't make sense with a building that close to the street, went with the projecting blade. So even though, yes, that is 2 signs on the same elevation, we feel that projecting sign fills the same need as those monument signs that are also visible from the right-of-way on the same elevation. Does that?
And I get that.
Okay.
And I'm just asking, do we need to enhance that or make it clear by saying the projecting sign is, or the fact that 2 signs are on the frontage here doesn't mean it's not a precedent that this is a unique situation. I'm just asking if we need to address that.
That could be up to the board. Staff's of the opinion that doesn't create a precedent because we mentioned that the development was encouraged to be so much closer to the sidewalk. And so, in essence, it would create a precedent if the town approves a master development plan where everything is brought up closer to the sidewalk. But perhaps that is a precedent that is okay to set. It's up to the board.
All right, so I just throw that out. And then if this is not a material question, stop me, but the sign plan, the master sign plan is for something with multiple businesses, right? So do those have to be multiple corporations?
No.
So it's just, they can all be owned by one owner, but have 3 separate uses, as it were. And we consider that would use a master sign plan.
Correct.
That's all I have.
That's all the questions? Anybody else have any follow-up questions? Okay, then we can move on to the applicant and the designer, if you guys want to come up and say anything.
I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have of us. I think the intent of the signage was to be very minimal and take colors from the building. If you've seen the building, you know it's all the metal and windows on the building are black and steel, so that was the takeoff there. And there's the stone itself has some orange veining and some rust tones, as well as the fact that the Stuart's logo and that thistle is in that same kind of Corten orange. So that was the basis for the signage. We consciously did move to make smaller signage. We didn't want a large, oppressive, we really want the architecture and the building forms to take precedent on the site.
Nobody ever comes and asks for less signage.
Could you please just state your name?
Sorry, Chris Canny with
Oh,
Arcanum
sorry.
Architecture, or architects for the project.
Okay, anybody have any questions?
Nope.
Barbara?
I think I'm good.
Karen?
Thank you.
Gary? Okay, I think they're beautiful, thanks. Okay, is there any public comment on this item in particular? Okay, seeing no public comment, then we will move on to a discussion of staff. Gary?
So I have another question. The findings that you have on pages 2 and 3 of the staff report, how do those get memorialized?
They stay on record, and so
Are they on record with the sign permit, or if we vote to approve this, are we approving this language in your staff report?
you would approve the findings, and you would also approve any conditions of approval. The staff report and the findings are held both attached to the project, tied to the master sign plan for the parcel. It's available on the website and within the planning department files. So in that sense, it's memorialized.
And they're approved as presented unless you modify them.
They what?
The findings.
So these are our findings. You don't do separate findings?
No.
Those are
Okay,
the
so
same
we approve
findings.
your findings or change them up?
Mhm.
Got it, thanks.
Okay, anybody have any comments? What do you think of the signs that have been presented here?
I like it. I think it's very tasteful. Everything about the property so far has been done very tastefully. I think the signs fit. I like the minimalistic approach to it. I'm all for it.
Good, okay, Barbara?
Yeah, I appreciate the fact that they didn't go really crazy about the signs and the sizes of that. It's very appropriate. I appreciate that.
I agree. I think they look beautiful and they match the property, which looks beautiful. They're very tasteful. I'm a little concerned that maybe the guest parking isn't big enough, but I mean, you have a big lot back there and it needs to be used. But if there's no guidelines to set it that way and nobody else cares. Karen?
I agree. The signage is subtle, but it's effective, so.
Carrie?
No, I like it all a lot. Good signs.
Okay. Somebody like to make a motion?
I'll move to present the application I'll move to accept the application as presented. Am I?
Yeah.
Yeah, there we
Good.
go. It's been a while.
And a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Congratulations. Your signs are approved. Thank you. Okay. One down. Are we okay? Okay. We will move on to the next presentation and discussion. 16-932, 6481 Washington Street, Master Development Plan Amendment for Bellagio Inn.
Good evening. You have before you a master development plan amendment for Bellagio Inn, and Bellagio was originally approved by the town council in 1997 with 112 guest rooms, a conference center, a spa complex, swimming pool, paved parking, circulation, and landscaping. And part of that approval included a requirement for the vineyard to the south of the property, and that's a 2.7 acre vineyard, and that serves as the project open space and also goes to reduce the site FAR or floor area ratio. And so the plans before you tonight are for exterior changes rather significantly to the lobby building, the main lobby, the main structure as you see the property, with more minor changes to the conference center and the former spa building. Although the former spa building, the changes to the exterior are also associated with a change in use, and we mentioned those to you here in terms of parking and other design issues, but this project will be referred to the town council in total for approval, and we're seeking your recommendation here tonight. Other changes include re-landscaping and a change in the parking lot. So more specifically, the lobby building will be modified with a new open-air entry structure that's centrally located. It will be constructed of wood, and they're open beams, so it does have that open aspect, although it will have the gable roof line and roof that ties into the main structure at the ridge height of the main building. The building will feature a new standing seam metal roof to replace the clay tile roof. And the posts and columns, the turn posts will be changed out in favor of squared, more rustic posts. And an additional improvement on the front side of this property is a new patio that it will be off the lobby and the lounge area, and it will be surrounded by a low stone wall that will match a new exterior chimney and fireplace that will be located on the new interior breezeway. And those changes really change the character of this building from the more Mediterranean thematic architecture to a more simplified, contemporary, and agrarian aesthetic, really, that is very popular and common in Napa Valley and certainly Yountville. So other changes proposed, as I mentioned, are the landscaping, and it's very manicured look now with the cypress trees and the clip boxwood hedges and topiaries and the more formal landscaping. The proposal is to remove all 8 cypress trees and then to introduce more casual, drought-tolerant landscaping. We haven't seen those plans in specific, just the conceptual proposal, and so we are recommending that there be a condition of approval added that it at the time it's submitted to comply with the town standards for replanting of trees as well as the water efficient landscape ordinance. Another significant change at the front of building is the parking lot, and it's a parking lot with 9 spaces. That's really a predominant feature at front of building. By extruding out the new entryway portico area, it would be transformed into an auto court. So we see elimination of 9 parking spaces, 3 of which are relocated to the north side of the building where there are existing parking spaces, but these would be accessible and meet the accessibility standard. And so we've reviewed it in terms of the town's parking standard, in terms of the number of spaces that are required, and based on the room standard, there is room to eliminate these spaces. We have mentioned that it may work on this property and it's under the current proposal, but raise it as a cautionary item in case the property is redeveloped and additional parking is needed, that they will have eliminated some parking, although they still do meet the minimum standard. We've analyzed it in terms of meeting the other zoning and design ordinance requirements and shared some analysis in terms of FAR, and we find that it is consistent with the town's floor area ratio. And I note in the staff report that we did include the open air reception area, and that we did not exempt this as a patio cover, balcony, or loggia, or unenclosed porch, which typically is a very open structure that doesn't contribute to massing. And even though the posts on the side of this building are open and it has open elements, the way it's incorporated into the building's roof line and the structure has massing that we believe is more appropriately counted as FAR. So we have counted that. Likewise, we have not removed the second floor office areas that were removed from the lobby building and the former spa building because these obviously contribute to massing in the same way, and they're not eligible for an FAR exemption where the distance from floor to ceiling is 16 feet or greater. And certainly in this case, the floor area ratio rules are intended to regulate massing and size of buildings on property, and both of these elements contribute to massing. I've noted a few other items in the staff report, as I mentioned, but the project is entirely consistent with the town zoning and design review ordinances. We looked at each of the elements from the design and came to the conclusion that this rebranding to the more contemporary local agrarian vernacular is consistent with the town's design standards that encourage buildings to support regional traditions, to maintain a level of craft in the process of construction, and then to utilize authentic and high-quality materials. So staff is supportive of the project, and we are recommending that you send a positive recommendation to the town council.
Okay. And what are you asking from us tonight? Are we getting to the point of approving it, or is this just a recommendation?
It's just a recommendation to the council, but you're looking at it in terms of design review. So that's all exterior changes, that's the removal of the trees, the new landscaping, the changes in parking. It's really the project in total, save for the conversion of the former spa to guest rooms.
And will you be taking all of our comments to town council
Yes.
individually?
Yes.
Okay.
Individual comments will be forwarded as in
Okay.
addition to the recommendation.
So we don't have to come to a group decision?
Well, we would like to see a consensus on whether
Okay.
to recommend approval or denial, but we will additionally include comments of individual members.
Okay. Okay. Does anyone have questions of staff? Carrie, you want to start?
Sure. So the 7.05 acre tract 2 and the 2.7 acre tract 3, separate tracts, both covered in the master development plan for this project.
Yes.
And so is that how they will continue to be linked together? Because what is to keep a property owner from selling tract 2 and then it gets developed and then we're over on FAR?
It is tied to this property and required to be maintained as open space. I believe additionally, and I don't have the exact information, that there is an easement for that property that requires it to be held as open space. It's not required to remain as vineyard, but as open space.
Okay, so I would be interested in including something that continues the linkage there as I think about the FAR and the whole appearance of the project. Then on the parking, we talked about the shared uses. So I've driven around there and walked around there 2 or 3 times since we got this on Friday. Where is the parking for the hotel? Is it behind the hotel? Is it the spaces in front of the hotel? Is it off to the side? Where are those
So at the end of
some
Oaks,
odd spaces that they have?
at the end of Oak Circle, you have the loop driveway that goes by the creek and comes out Mulberry, and all of those spaces are counted. There are a few spaces counted on what could be considered an alley, more toward property frontage behind the newer spa. And there are additional spaces on the hotel property to the other side of the Mulberry driveway extension that may appear more like they are V Marketplace parking spaces. But all of those are on the Bellagio parcel.
Okay, so the ones next to Silver Trident, between Silver Trident and Cornerstone, that lot.
Those are the spa parking places.
So those are the spa parking places. So the spa has its own parking places.
Yes.
And is that addressed anywhere in what you sent us, the spa parking places?
No, because those are on a separate parcel and they're not triggered by this project. This was reviewed just in terms of Bellagio
Okay, so when the
Hotel.
spa converts to the villas, right, that's what we want to happen.
Oh, I'm sorry, there's some confusion that there is the former spa that is tucked back at the end of the Mulberry driveway extension near the tennis courts.
Right.
And the new spa is replaced that, and it's on Washington Street. It's that building of prominence that will continue to
Next
function
to
as
Silver
such.
Trident, yeah.
So that will continue to be the spa.
Yes.
So the building in the back is what's going to convert to the villas.
Mhm.
So the parking lot I'm talking about goes with new spa.
Yes, the new spa, whereas the villas is on the hotel property.
Okay, So the conversion to villas is going to be in the back?
Is in the back.
Okay.
Yes,
got it.
sorry that
Got it.
wasn't clear.
No problem. All right, so and this may be a better question for the applicant, but it looks to me like there is an expansion of the bar, the lounge area, and the outdoor seating. Do we know how many total additional seats are planned?
No, and we're not concerned with seats because hotels calculate the parking standard based on number of rooms, and the hotel is not otherwise, that area is not otherwise open to the public, so we don't have to address the additional parking standard.
So the only reason I ask that is I harken back to the recent changes to Hotel Yountville where public access was allowed. And it looks like we're adding a lot of seats that could become, and I understand that's not before us tonight, but just as we look forward, if the applicant comes and says, I want the public to access my restaurant or my limited service restaurant or bar, there are a lot of seats in there. So I
Right.
just point that out.
And part of the reason staff made the comment that parking is addressed by the current application, but any intensification of use or potential redevelopment of the site would trigger parking.
Right, right. I just want that to be on the record now that. So the new entry plan, has someone engineered that of a car coming in and flipping around like that? To see if the radius is correct and if it really works?
No, not yet. Or not from the town's perspective. I would turn to the applicant to address that.
So that may be for the applicant. Is it planned when all of the landscaping comes out and the auto court goes in, is it planned for there to be parking there?
In the auto court, no, that parking is being removed and it will serve as vehicle drop-off and delivery and more of a valet function. That will be part of the sort of upgraded guest experience for the hotel.
But as a practical matter, that's going to be a nice big slab of concrete, and what will the town do to enforce no parking there? Or will it be, as a practical
Well, we wouldn't
matter-
mind if people parked there. We are not counting any spaces in that area toward their parking minimum or their parking standard, and it's shown more as a court. So it's up to really the owner-operator to decide how that area is used.
Because my comment would be, I would not like to see parking there, because it's a big slab of concrete where there's now landscaping, and if they valet stack 6 or 8 cars in there, that's a complete change of the complexion of how things look. So that would be my comment. On the landscaping, it appears that applicant is seeking to basically remove everything that's currently between Washington and the hotel.
Yes, that's what we
And there's going to
understand.
be an auto court, which is a concrete with a wall around it. And on the other side, there's going to be a lawn, maybe. So I would like to know whether ZDRB could approve the landscaping plan when it comes forward.
Yes, you could.
And in that regard, who would specify tree size, number, placement, etc.?
We have since received an arborist report after submittal of the staff report to you that identifies the trees for removal and which will enable staff to evaluate what's being removed and what the required replacement would be to work with the applicant. That's something that we could bring back before you as part of the revised landscape plan. Or it could be approved at staff level for an evaluation of whether it conforms with the town code or not.
Okay. The seating area where the new fireplace is going to go with the new entry, is that seating area going to come farther out than the current roof overhang?
Yes.
And how big will that seating area be, or is that an
It-
applicant question?
It will come out to the edge of the new extruded entryway. So it essentially will go out into the parking spaces, and parking spaces are 20 feet wide, in addition to a little bit of removal of the walkway. So it is significant.
And so if we, now I'm on to FAR, if we agree with the .259, with assuming the additional 921 square feet, do we need a variance finding? I might be off
No.
on my decimals.
Well, for one, this is developed as a master development plan, so it's not held strictly to that 25% FAR. There is more flexibility, and yet when you look at these numbers, they're essentially held within that same standard, especially since the vineyard is to be considered as part of the open space and therefore affects FAR.
Okay, so we don't have to make a finding of this
No.
is why we do it or this is why we don't.
Mm-mm.
Okay. And you have, am I correct that you guys have done separate FAR analyses for the hotel, the spa/villas and the conference center? Or
No,
this is
that's all
separate?
on the same property, so it's all under the FAR that's evaluated in this. It's a large parcel. We're talking a 7-acre parcel, so it includes the lobby, all of the different buildings. It includes the central walkway with that water feature, and at the other end toward Mulberry is where you see the conference center and the former spa.
So all of that together is, and counting tract, not counting tract 3, the vineyard, all of that together is .259?
Right, up from .256.
Okay. All right. And then, the lighting, do we know the hours of the lighting, or is that, of the proposed lighting, or is that a question for the applicant?
Question for the applicant.
Okay, and how about, can the lighting plan come back to the ZDRB?
That could too, yes. In any case, it's required to conform to the town's lighting ordinance.
And on the proposed stone wall, what governs the height of that?
There is not a requirement as to height. It's not a property line wall or fence. It's more a decorative landscape element, so so we don't have that same height requirement. It's not in the front setback, it's not in the side setback, it's not on property line.
And is the area inside the wall going to be considered public space?
No, that would be space for the guests. You have to enter through the building itself to access that area.
Okay, so it is space being used only by their guests, but we are not including it in FAR because it's an outdoor space.
Right, it's
Because of the
not
massing
built
issue.
area, it's open space.
Okay. But not for public.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, Karen?
Keep us for a second.
Okay, I just had one question of staff, and it was addressed by Carrie, the removal of all the existing landscape all the way up to the sidewalk. Okay.
Well, it's not being removed and not replaced.
Oh, that looks like that on the plan.
It does, I know. That's why we're identifying it as conceptual. They've shared with us greater detail that it will be a drought tolerant and local landscape plan that's more casual. Have
And
not
how
gone into
much?
the details, and that's why it obviously has to come
A
back. for
6-inch strip
conformance.
or a 3-inch strip, 4-foot strip, that is important to the look. It's dramatically changing the look.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
We are not suggesting or even recommending that they remove landscaping and not replace it. We just don't know the details of the replacement
Okay.
under this application.
Okay. Barbara?
I am supposing that with all the changes, have they maxed out the FAR, the project as a whole?
For when looking at this property, I would say yes.
So
There may be some room to deal with FAR in terms of the property as a whole, but obviously that's not before the secret.
No.
Yeah. And also I have the same feeling about the frontage on Washington Street, the landscaping plans, and how far back are they going to be landscaped? Where they meet the hardscape or the open space for the guests and all that.
So existing planters would be maintained as planters. The area of the new outdoor patio will have new trees and new landscaping in an area that was parking, so that's really intended to bring more living material and to soften the hardscape. But I'll let the applicants address that more because it is so conceptual I can't speak to the details on it.
It is very much to the front of Washington Street.
Yes.
It's going to change the whole look.
Okay. Mikhail?
Just to try and summarize, so basically the landscaping would come back before us when it's more kind of set in stone and finalized. The lighting we could ask to come back and forth in front of us, even though it has to adhere to the town lighting procedure or
Both of those
ordinance.
items you can request that they come back before you.
Okay. Parking, we really have no, I mean, that's not really a design thing, is it? In terms of how many parking spots they have, isn't that more of a use permit?
It is a design item in terms of the location of parking, and the paved areas are important to the total aesthetic of a building and the prominence of parking in the front. Like Mr. Dorman mentioned, the stacking of vehicles would change the feel and appearance of that area. So that's what you're looking at.
Okay. Yeah, that's my only questions.
Okay. Any follow-up or anything? Okay. Okay, then we can move to the applicant and/or the designer, however you'd like to come up and talk a little about your project and answer any questions you've already heard come up.
Good evening.
Your name?
My name is Bruce Wright,
Okay.
and I'm a principal at SB Architects, and we're the architectural designers of the project. And I just firstly want to say thank you to Sandra for all of the help and the excellent guidance sort of preparing for the evening, and I hope I'm here to answer many of these questions, all of which are quite valid and important to us. So if I can, I'll just make a brief presentation about the Bellagio, and then we'll follow up with the Vintage as that's under a separate application. I'm here tonight with Mr. Steve Davino, who's the general manager and representing our client Thayer Properties, and Aaron Cook, who's assisting me at SB Architects. So this is the site plan that encompasses specifically the Bellagio tract, and I'm sorry, I wish we could zoom in, but we can.
We've got copies here.
You've got copies, so maybe this will help sort of with sort of parking and circulation, some of those ideas. So on the southern part of the site along Washington is the existing Bellagio lobby building, which is really the
How's that for zoom in?
That's good. That's perfect.
Okay.
Way to go, Nathan. And our client came to us with a fantastic new opportunity, and that is that they just recently purchased the property, actually, I think in May, and they had some fabulous ideas about renovating the property in a way that was much more consistent and authentic to Yountville and the Napa Valley, and much of that had to do with addressing the thematic Italianate architecture that was present on site. As much about the architecture, it also has to do with the landscaping, the more formalized Italianate landscaping that goes with the project. And so related specifically to the Bellagio, there were sort of three key elements that we wanted to address. We wanted to address the presence of the building on Washington Street. We wanted to give it a more stately arrival, something that's more authentic, that would fit in with the interior renovation and some of the larger renovations that are happening to the guest rooms at the Bellagio Inn. Secondly, we wanted to eliminate the notion of a parking lot or a series of cars that are in front of the building and that really block the view of the property and its prominence on Washington Street. And we wanted to create, thirdly, a series of indoor-outdoor areas that tie the hotel guests back to the town. So thus, our proposal tonight is to prepare a new facade design that is, we think of it as an architectural feature. We can talk about whether it is considered FAR or not, but in this context tonight, that's the recommendation of staff. We wanted to talk about this indoor-outdoor relationship of the property to Yountville and the wonderful weather that we have here 8-9 months out of the year, and the elimination of what we see as parking that is sort of this blockade between Washington and the entry to the lobby building. Sort of as a follow-up to that, we're also talking about the renovation of the former spa building that is now unused on property. The spa has been shifted off to another track, and this building sits sort of underutilized, and it's the goal of our clients to renovate that into 5 guest rooms. Not necessarily individual villas, but just 5 additional keys for the hotel that would all be housed inside the same massing and definition of that existing building. And then third is really primarily an interior renovation to the conference facility, and what we're suggesting is renovating some of the older door and window configuration into something that again creates a more contemporary utilization of that conference room space to be sort of this indoor-outdoor configuration. But the renovations that you would see the most, and I think that are of topic tonight, is that of what's happening with the lobby building. So we just have a few slides here to capture sort of the spirit of the place and sort of the warmth and the layering and the authenticity that we find here in the Napa Valley that somehow is a disconnect with the existing architecture and design, landscape design that you find at the Bellagio today. And we're really loving the idea of these indoor-outdoor spaces and creating sort of large, if you'd like to call them a lobby lounge or outdoor living room for our guests that are on both sides of the building that create a much more sort of transparent architecture and experience, so that we're utilizing the property instead of for parking and asphalt and hardscape. We're giving that back to the hotel guest. So we're seeing, we have the same concerns as you about landscaping and foliage and trees. We don't want to create a barren desert that's the transition between Washington Street and the front door of the Bellagio. We want to create something that's much more user-friendly, that is drought-tolerant plants, but that is of the place and that is less about cars and more about people. So these are just 2 elevations. The upper elevation is what's existing. You'll notice there's a smaller Italianate entry that exists today. There's also 2 dormers that you see at the top of the building. One of those dormers would be removed as we're renovating the interior space to open it up and create a more gracious entry and something that falls into more of an alignment with the entry, the lobby space, and then the pools beyond. So we'll be eliminating some of the office space up above that's currently used for admin space, and we'll be giving that back to the interior renovation of the lobby space. Secondly, there were some questions about the size of a stone wall. In the site plan, the depth of the new portico element, as it was described, is approximately 18 feet, which is about the same dimension of the existing parking that's there to date. We're going to create a small 2 to 3 foot stone wall that connects that portico, sort of gives a certain level of privacy, but that differentiates between the town sort of public space and the hotel guest space, and that'll be managed through operations of the hotel. So this is the existing photographs of what you see today. It's heavy stone columns, the cypress trees, the very formalized gardens that I think at the time might have been appropriate, but now I think can be more reflective of the town of Yountville and the greater Napa Valley. So this is a conceptual rendering. It's not it's not an exact replica of what's happening with the landscape design or the asphalt or all of the planting that would happen between the existing building, the outdoor patio space that has the indoor-outdoor fireplace, and Washington Street. So we're still developing those plans, but our concept is, I think, in alignment with much of the statements that you've made, that this is the front door. It is a dramatic change, but we believe a dramatic change for the better, that will have a series of landscape elements that will create this sort of refreshing layering that's not just this hardscape desert between the front door of Bellagio and Washington Street. So that's sort of my quick follow-up to Sandra's great preamble in the beginning, so
Okay.
happy to answer questions.
Yeah, we'll run down and see if people have questions. Mikhail, do you have some questions?
I guess my main concern on this, I guess twofold. The one, first of which being the lighting, which we didn't really talk too much about, but in this open air kind of check-in lobby space, what are the expectations? Is that 24 hours a day that's going to be kind of illuminated, and that's your primary check-in location? Is this open air space? Or?
This is just really an open air porte cochere. Mm-hmm. All of the check-in and the day-to-day functions are happening inside in a conditioned space that's climatically controlled. This is just sort of a welcome element where you would arrive, maybe there's a greeter who's giving you a glass of water on your arrival, or maybe a bottle of water on your departure, and it's a chance for you to exit your car, which would be valeted and parked, or self-parked. I think there's still some combination of those two, but it's really a segue that leads you into a transition space that leads you into the main lobby mm-hmm. space for check-in.
No, I think it's great. My main concern again would be that being illuminated for extended hours of the evening.
Yeah, I think that it's a great question about lighting. Mm-hmm. So a little bit about the team. SB Architects are the architectural designers of the project. George Gervin Associates is the landscape designer. Hirsch Bedner out of Los Angeles is the interior designer and also providing lighting design services. So George's shop is landscape, and they're working on sort of all of the planting plans, and it would answer some of your specific questions. It would be follow-up along with the lighting plans that would meet the town code, but also give information about how bright, how long, hours, and those sorts of things. But at a minimum, there's a certain level of just public safety that we would have to have a certain amount of foot candles just for people arriving on off hours.
Okay. No, I think the design looks great.
Barbara?
Yeah, I like the design. I think it's a tremendous update. It's time to do it. I agree. It's very refreshing. My only concern is when you're doing this kind of very simple approach, we want some landscaping to soften some of that, because it becomes a lot of hardscaping. We would prefer not to have that for the town. We like to see a lot more landscaping by nature, not stone. I would appreciate that.
Sure. I'm going to just ask all the board members to please move their microphones in front of their mouths. The reason sometimes there's feedback is because the volume's turned all high together.
Other than that, I think it's a tremendous improvement.
Thank you.
I agree. I like the architectural design of the presented project. There's a lot of discussion in town always when projects come to us as to how they fit the character of the town and how they fit the character of the surrounding buildings. And since you have a lot of surrounding buildings on your property that are of this Mediterranean style, how will you be fitting this in with your other buildings?
So the idea is to really focus most of the exterior renovations on this particular building. As we mentioned, there was the retreat and also the conference center. Those will be far more interior based. On the exterior of the building, on the exterior of the balance of the guest room buildings, it's actually a very simplified approach, which is paint, is landscaping, lighting, and then an interior refresh. So the combination of all three of those, we think, will sort of tie a certain consistency together throughout the property. And Bellagio will have its own distinct brand, and I think there'll be a consistency between the public spaces and the private spaces, your guest room spaces. Cost is always a concern, so going through and changing all of the roofs all at the same time is I think something that is really out of reach right now for the particular budget. So what we'd like to do is have a little bit of variation, just like many buildings that you find here in town, but a consistency of furniture, of finishes, of landscaping that'll tie all those together.
So the long-term plan is to landscape everything.
The immediate plan
But
is
the long term.
In the long term is to create a landscape palette that makes this transition from what you find similar to what we'd seen earlier, this sort of Italianate, very formalized series of water features, landscape, hardscape, and to soften that with landscaping that's much more in keeping with the valley.
Okay. The courtyard where the cars pull in, I can see you have a little drawing where you're demonstrating they pull in and they stay to the right and they circle around, and I think that would not be the natural way that people would pull in there. They would pull in, see wherever the valet person is, and pull up to that side, so a little backwards of your drawing. And then, like, you look at Bartisono's parking lot.
Sorry.
There's cars parked everywhere.
I don't think we have all those same exhibits here.
Okay.
I think I think this deck is slightly different than.
The submitted plans. I can go get the plans.
No,
pull
that's
them up.
Well,
that's okay. I think there
It's
is.
just kind of a question that how are you going to monitor how that area is used so that it's not used for parking?
Right.
It's all kind of wrapping around to what it looks like to people driving by and people walking down the sidewalk. When pictures are taken of Yountville, the character and the quaintness of Yountville is the roses, the boxwood, the plantings, the parks, all that kind of goes together with the quaintness, and it's being wiped out, and cars are up against the sidewalk. And with a lot of motion of cars driving in and out of there, and I think I'm hearing a lot of concern for that, and doesn't sound like there's quite a plan yet.
So specifically now what we're doing is we're eliminating 9 parking spots, but we're creating it's sort of a transition zone where we're trying to get cars in and move them out. So on a Sunday morning, operationally, I'm sure there's people checking out and there's a high demand for parking. If you go there right now, all of the parking spaces, I believe, are listed for registration only, so people would drive in and there's only 9 spots, but there's 122 rooms. So there is some management of operationally of how that works, and maybe we can give some more detail about the choreography of how you would move cars in and out, but it's never intended for cars to be parked there all the time. It's not a tarmac where valet parking would leave cars in front, because that works kind of against the idea of removing the parking in the first place and adding in more pedestrian-friendly sort of environment. So if we need to provide more detail for that, we can. But our intent is not to make that a long-term valet parking location. We're just going to bring cars in. People will arrive and depart, and we'll move them back to either self-parking or they'll have a valet option.
Right now, there are always cars parked there, but you don't see them. We, the public, don't see them because they're behind all the plantings, all the shrubs, all the plants, all the landscaping. Right. To us walking down the street, driving down the street, it's beautiful landscaping. not cars going in and out. So I think that's what we're kind of looking to hope to see avoided
Okay.
or continue.
Yeah,
from
and I
our
think
side
that that's a
avoided, our
valid
side.
comment about maybe there's increased landscaping along Washington Street, but I think we want to balance the two. We want to create a view and it's sort of an attraction to the front door in a different way than it is now, because when you actually exit Bellagio now, you see all the back ends of all of these cars, which I think also is, for the guest, maybe not quite as, I think that could be improved. So I think let's if there's a question about that, we're happy to follow up with some
I think
more
there definitely
engineering
is,
and
yeah. Okay.
landscaping. And I think it is a very sensitive topic, and I think that our goal is very much in alignment with what you're describing. We want to eliminate cars, eliminate parking, and we want to make it sort of an attractive pedestrian destination for guests and for the town.
Okay. Can we talk about the, what are you calling it, the portico?
Yeah, the porte cochere.
Porte cochere. Corten, painted? What is?
No, I think we have a standing seam metal roof, and whether
And then
that's
the
a batten
columns?
seam or a standing seam, and then the columns would all be rough sawn wood. So we're eliminating the concrete precast columns that are there, and we're just using a more simplified, probably like a.
So these will all be just wood columns. How far the spacing? Looks from the angle the picture's taken, it looks solid.
It's not. So they'll be at least probably about 12 inches between each of the ribs.
So pretty narrow. I mean, you're trying to kind of make a solid.
We're trying to make this transition from exterior to interior, not have just a couple of large, massive columns that support the structure, and just create a rhythm and an architecture that is much more sort of agrarian feeling, and but is transparent, and it's both opaque and transparent depending on what angle you're looking at
This
it.
whole thing. Yes.
So that's not enclosed.
It's not enclosed. It's open air. The wind will
But the
blow
spaces
through.
are only, 12 inches.
I think we're very excited about the design, and we think it'll be quite elegant.
It is. It just looks a little heavy visually for the front.
Fair comment.
Okay, I think that was my list. Karen?
You answered the enclosure question that I had. And then the other, I think this is a huge improvement to what it is currently. And you're right, it is kind of getting it back up to speed with, I think, the modern scope of Yountville in the Valley. With regards to the entrance, and I know landscape, we're going to go over landscape in a lot more detail. Are you proposing that actually the existing landscape on the front would actually be just entirely going away? Is that?
Let me just.
They're going to put in something different.
So
but they will
I think
bring us a
the,
photo.
Replacing it with
the
something
intent of both the concrete, the sort of concrete
before that,
pavers.
actually.
We're concerned with the part from the sidewalk
Not that,
to the
but I
parking
mean-
lot.
I think
The
that
box
same box sort of, we
Feel?
can have a conversation about it, but
Yeah,
I think
right.
we'd want the same landscape to be consistent between the two. So without having specific detail, I would say that those existing hedges and things would somehow change.
But there would still be that kind of, there'd be some sort of division between,
The sidewalk and the property, there
Right,
would be plant,
right.
yeah, absolutely. And it might actually be larger than before, because we have some flexibility without the car parking spaces.
okay. Got it. I think that was it.
Carrie?
So could you go back to your slide, please, of the proposed elevation?
Existing and proposed,
Yes.
sure.
So that is different from what we have,
No.
no?
No.
Oh, am I just on a different side?
No.
There,
That's it.
there,
Yeah, that's it.
No. I see what you're saying.
No, the one, it's different from the one I have.
could I just see?
Yeah, it's
Oh,
different.
there's one dormer.
There's no dormer here.
And a couple windows. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
There's a couple more
So
windows on
which
that.
are we looking at?
This is,
Oh, yeah.
I believe this is what's submitted, and if not, this is the
We've got a
proper.
nano wall and one window on the front and no dormer.
Right, so
But this is
that
what's-
the dormer would remain,
Right.
and the sort of folding wall, whether it's a nano wall or whatever system that is, that exists, plus some additional windows that might be different than your plan, but this is the intent. So we want to make it more transparent, not less. So we're
And the columns don't go as far.
It
That's
ends,
the picture we have.
I see.
Column, the rendering we have, the columns
Go
extend
all the
to-
way.
all the way to the north end.
Yeah, you're right.
And I think, so is there a, Nathan, could you just point sort of where those existing trees are? Yeah. So I think the existing condition actually stops. I think we're not proposing to add more columns or more sloped roof. I believe that it stops at that point, so that's consistent with before and after. We've just changed the column type. We can confirm that.
So, but this is the one you're proposing?
That's what we would propose, and
With the little pop, with the little dormer?
with a dormer, yeah. So that we still have some administration space that's upstairs. So you see there's two dormers that are existing, both gable dormers, and we're proposing just modifying that to be one shed dormer, but the spaces up above are consistent.
And you're proposing to take down those two trees that are shown on the right, assuming they're actually...
I think those are shown for,
Yeah, they're not back.
those aren't the exact trees that are there, no. The arborist report, I think, lists many of those. Let me see if there's just any more photos that might clarify.
All right, with that behind us, since we're all now going to talk about the same thing, you don't, am I correct that you do not know yet how the valet will work, whether it'll be 100% valet or optional self-park, or what percentage will be valet?
Yeah, no, I don't have any specific, but perhaps Steve would have some more insight, but I think the intent is to create some flexibility
Okay.
or optionality for both.
Landscaping, you're open to adding. So let me start by saying I like the architecture of the project.
Thank you.
I do like it. I am, like I think I hear most of the other members, concerned a bit about a big bald auto court between the street and where your stone wall for your bar area starts. Because an auto court by its nature is a concrete slab.
Exactly.
And I think one thing that the architecture aside, one thing that makes the current configuration work is when you look at the aerial or when you're at the street view, there's a lot of greenery woven into what's happening with the cars.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be an issue that I echo of the other members. As far as the actual design, how big would the wood columns be, both for the porte-cochere and across the front?
So let me just start with the existing colonnade that's there. Right now, they're 12 to 18-inch stone columns, but inside of those is probably a 8x8 post that's actually structurally supporting it. So that's 6x6, 8x8, something of that nature would remain for the existing porch. The size and scale of the porte-cochere, that's probably a dimension somewhere 4x8, so they're probably a more rectangular shape versus a square shape.
Okay. And are you going to leave the color the same? Are you just going to touch up the stucco?
So the stucco color will change slightly, but it'll sort of remain something of this sort of beige. It's not a significant change between the two.
And what color will your roof be?
The roof is sort of a brown. It'll be a metal roof. It won't be copper. It'll be a metal roof that looks something like copper. Is there on our image board or on our material board? Did we have that information that's in their set? Okay.
On the lighting, and I'll ask some more about staff on this, but I will say that I have heard from some residents that we have put in some LED lights recently, particularly in our parks, that people have not been very fond of, and maybe some street lights too, because they put off too much light. So I appreciate the energy saving, and that's a fine needle to thread, but that's one reason I personally would like the ZDRB to see a lighting plan to kind of figure that out. I have the same concerns as Member Tigret about the hours of the lighting, both for the porte-cochere and for the outdoor bar. Because right now, that's really not used at night. So if you're planning to have bar service out there till 9, 10, 11 o'clock, and you're asking for both overhead and up, I guess, landscape kind of lighting, uplighting, I would be interested to know more details on that. Also, the same thing on the auto court lighting, which I think is proposed. What, in addition to street lights, would you need? What, in addition to the street lights and whatever's going to be under your porte-cochere, would you need? So I'm just showing an interest in the lighting plan and how much there will be.
Right.
I would prefer to see a 2-foot stone wall rather than a 3, because I just think if you're trying to welcome and draw people through, a 3-foot wall of stone is pretty formidable, can look that way.
Yeah, I think there's some existing stone walls that are there that this is just a continuation of, that's on the south side of the existing lobby building, and I believe they're approximately 24 inches, and our idea is that it would be almost like a seating wall. You could sit on it comfortably and chat. It's not it's more of a, it's just sort of a mechanism to note this is sort of a dividing line between the public side and the hotel guest side, right, for some of the comments that you were talking about before. But our intent is not to make this some large sort of wall, but just something comfortable to sit on that has some demarcation of space.
And I notice on the plan, are you planning on or am I thinking of the Vintage Inn? The Vintage Inn is going to have the trellis, right? That's where we're going to talk about.
Yeah, we can talk about the arbor.
All right, I think that's it from me for now. Thank you.
Okay, anybody have any follow-up questions of the designer, architect? Okay, thank you. Any public that's here tonight want to comment on this project? Anybody else want to comment? Okay, then I will close that part and we will move on to staff discussion. Trying to kind of wrap up what everybody's saying. I think there's obvious concern with the landscaping and the look of the property from the sidewalk and from the street. That's where the majority of the people that come to town see it. And so I think this is just conceptual. I think they've gotten our view of what we see as our objections to it. And with the list of things that I kind of jotted down, that we wanted to see the linkage of the two properties on the paper so that doesn't get track 3 doesn't get pulled off separately. Talking about the limiting of valet parking in the front of the lot so that it wouldn't become a visual parking lot. See the lighting plan and see the landscaping plan before it would get approval. Does anybody want to add their thoughts? That was just sort of trying to recap it quickly.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm not as concerned with parking because I think they share our same goals and motives for this. I don't think as a business they want to see cars backing up in front of their shop, and if they do, I'm assuming management wouldn't be too pleased with valet if that was happening and cars are piling up front. The fact that they have the sidewalk kind of open it, or the welcome area, it looks like on I'm not sure what page this is, but it opens right up into the sidewalk. Almost appears that like it's a warm greeting area right into their front welcome area, which I think is a really, really great touch with kind of that open air welcome area. So very well done on that. I really like that. But I think the parking won't be as cold as we assume it will be, because I think they'll be very diligent at making sure those cars are being moved out for the own sake of their business.
True.
That's everything. Right. Sorry.
That's okay. Your mind wanders off. Barbara, did you have any comments?
Yes, I further looking at with your questioning on the open slack of the welcoming passage, if you will. I like that open air approach rather than a piece of solid wood all the way through, because the weather is so nice around here. The fresh air, the outdoor, it really enhances the entrance. I think that's a great idea. I applaud you for that. That's a wonderful idea. And the open air, take advantage of the good weather, and the town is the walking town. So this change will make it very inviting, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Karen?
No, I think what I said earlier, I think it's a great improvement. And in light of the few, not necessarily opposing schemes, but more so just things to think about with the lighting and the landscaping, I think that being noted, I think it's a good step in the right direction.
Okay. Carrie?
I think it's a good step in the right direction, too. I agree with your list, although I am still concerned with the parking in front. I get what you're saying, Mikhail, but that sort of remains to be seen. So I would like to have some comfort on that. I would also like to have, for the entire piece of property, because we're going to go on to discuss the spa and the conference center, sort of, and this would be from staff, sort of a little schematic of where are the parking places and how many are there, just so that we would have that in front of us to check out. I don't know the process. I personally am not willing to say to town council right now, I recommend it with all of these things outstanding. Maybe the rest of the board is, but I really like the project. I like how it looks, but the lighting, the landscaping, the parking, all those things can make or break it from the town's point of view. My personal feelings about the look of it aside.
Okay. I guess all part of this project, though, are the two we need to include. I mean, those are kind of our comments on that, but as approving or giving a statement, we also need to talk about the conference center and the retreat.
Yes.
Okay. Those, to me, look like they're basically just window changes. Okay.
Window and door modifications.
Window and door modifications. Did anybody have any comments or concerns with those modifications?
I just had a question. Are there going to be courtyards or patios to these villas? I'm assuming that there will be. I'm sorry. Whoever can answer that for me.
This one.
Come on up.
Could I just take a peek quickly?
You might want to bring this microphone. Okay. While he's looking, I'll mention, Member Dorm, you asked to see the entire property in either the conference room set or the retreat set. There's the full property with all the parking. It shows exactly where it is at.
Great. I will use that then.
Okay.
And these need, Sandra,
Yes.
These need design review. I mean, it doesn't seem like a design review thing that they're changing out the windows.
Yeah, we identified that it's really minor and incidental, and it's not really part of this package. We've noted it so you know the comprehensive nature of the changes they're making to
Okay.
these buildings and what their goal is.
Okay.
But yes, as I reflect on it now, it's not really part of this design review.
Okay. So unless anybody has any specific comments or concerns, we can kind of rely on staff to handle that. Okay. That sounds good. Carrie, did you have any questions or concerns?
The
about
question was about, is there private courtyards or something? So right now, no, except for the existing pool facility that's there is really the only private courtyard. The rest are just independent entry doors into the 5 guest rooms, well, 4 other guest rooms.
And are you looking at landscaping or lighting changes for this project?
Yes. Primarily with
Site-wide.
Site-wide is a sort of comprehensive landscape site lighting plan, but specifically for these buildings, there would be entry lighting so that each guest room would have a front door and there would be a light with each room number. And then there would be internal lighting, I guess, to the courtyard and the pool area that's behind those existing walls. That was the prior spa pool that would be reconfigured in part of the landscape plan. But it's not primarily reflected on these plans.
So when we talk about landscaping and lighting tonight, we're talking about all 3 of these pieces.
The
We'll get the same basic treatment, or we'll be part of a common theme.
I think there should be specific questions related to each of the buildings about lighting and landscaping, but then in general, there will be a site landscape development plan with both hardscape and softscape that will follow.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. You should have gotten a lot of comments from us. Does somebody want to do you want me to do a motion that we can kind of vote on? Do you want to do it?
Well, I guess my question for staff is, and maybe for the board too, is what motion would we make? Are we prepared to recommend it or not recommend it, or do we need a motion if we're not prepared to recommend it? How does it work?
I would think that we would, well, it sounded to me like we would voice our approval and voice our concerns and ask that it come back.
Let me give a stab at it and
Please.
see if I have it right. So the board would recommend that the town council approve the design review aspects of the project with the added conditions of those 4 you added, that a landscape plan come back before the zoning and design review board for approval, that the lighting plan return to the board for approval, about the vineyard and keeping that in perpetuity for FAR, and then to the one on limiting valet parking.
Yes, the concern and how that will be addressed. I'll second that.
Somebody needs to first it.
Oh, yeah, somebody want to make a motion that we accept the project as presented with the concerns that staff laid out? Is that close enough with the ones that you
Yeah, I
just
know what you're
listed?
getting at.
Yes.
If that
I
covers
don't have
all
to
of
say
it.
them again.
Was there anything else to add that we missed?
That's what I had. Landscape, lighting,
Okay.
valet parking.
Okay.
In a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? No one? Okay. One down. We can move on to 16-923, 6541 Washington Street, Master Plan Development Amendment for the Vintage Inn.
Right, so tonight you have before you a request to amend the master development plan for the Vintage property. And that property was originally approved by the town council in 1984, and it includes 80 guest rooms, a swimming pool, a paved parking area, and the site landscaping. As with the Bellagio, the applicants are intending to update the look and feel of the structure to give it a more unique Napa Valley aesthetic and to increase the streetscape appeal of the project. So I'll go into some of those changes with you. On the main building, they're proposing to extrude a portion of the lobby at the north end of the building and reconfigure the window fenestration with the tall bank of windows, and to install vertical siding and a second-story gable. There's also a trellis system that separates two banks of those windows. It's proposed to modify the existing hip roof and to add a new gable roof on both ends of the lobby, reconfigure the windows and doors, to paint the structure white, and again, as with the Bellagio project, is to reconfigure the vehicular entry and the parking lot as an auto court. This time it would be surrounded by a low stone wall in a square formation, and 3 of the existing parking spaces would be relocated. We need really to understand those in greater detail because of the accessibility requirements for entries. This project is different in that they're proposing a new entryway trellis or arbor over the walkway, and again, it's to link the public spaces to the buildings and draw people in from the street. Their existing landscaping would be removed and completely refreshed. Again, we don't have details on all those specifics. And some trees are proposed for removal, including the 2 large Japanese maples out front and 5 cypress trees. And when trees are proposed for removal, there will be a replanting schedule and requirement, again, of which we don't have details. So we've analyzed the architectural elements of the project in terms of compliance with the town's zoning and design review ordinances, and we find that they're consistent. In terms of floor area ratio, the FAR is a little higher on this property than the current standard of 25%. At the time it was approved in '84, it was at 0.297, so closer to 30%, and they're proposing to increase it by 192 square feet to bring it to 0.299. We find that this is really de minimis. It is a master development project, so there is flexibility in increasing the amount, and we're really looking at 192 square feet. We reviewed it in terms of parking and relocating the parking spaces, and at the time of approval, only 80 spaces were required. There are 90 spaces in the lot, and the relocation would reduce that to 87. While we still do have concerns about the accessibility space, they still meet the standard because they're not changing the intensity of the use. That would change how the parking standard was applied. Again, lighting is conceptual, and we're proposing a condition that it comply with the town standards. Same requirement for the landscaping, but we are finding that we believe that these changes really elevate this property and use an aesthetic that is very local, agrarian, contemporary, and just a benefit for the property. So while some questions remain, as they did with the Bellagio, we do support the project, and we are recommending that you make a recommendation to approve to the town council.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have questions of staff? Carrie, you want to start?
On the parking, can we recommend to town council that compliance with the current code be required?
Well, generally, there has to be a nexus for that requirement, and since they're not changing the use, there's no change in parking. So in my opinion, it still meets the standard of when it was approved in '84.
So to bring it into code compliance, we have to show some changed circumstance? We don't just apply the current code?
Yes.
Okay. And I should have asked this on Bellagio also. Will either of these be subject to the new parking management plan that we're trying to implement? Do these
Yes.
changes trigger that?
Yes. When we take it to town council, we'll have a recommended condition to that effect.
Okay. So that'll be for both projects. So are we changing the curb cut location where the current driveway is?
No, it's the same access point. It's just a reconfiguration of on-site circulation.
And so the driveway's the same width?
Yes.
And you'll still be able to go in and go left to the parking in front of the Rosinger Estate? Sorry. What has happened to and this may be for the applicant, what has happened to the staging kitchen? Is it getting moved upstairs? Is it just getting abandoned? That's shown on the existing plan.
I'll let the applicant respond
Okay,
to that one.
applicant. And do we know anything about the trellis, or is that for the applicant? The size and what it will be?
Yeah, again, it's shown conceptual. We don't have scaled drawings to let you know what its exact footprint is or what it's set back from back of sidewalk.
Okay, thank you.
Karen, questions of staff?
Not of staff, I might have some questions with,
Yeah,
after.
yeah. I do not have any questions of staff. Barbara?
I don't either.
Mikhail?
For the FAR, for that to remain higher than standard, what it is now, do we need a variance or anything like that?
No, the way I looked at it was, and it didn't increase it to the next percentage upward. So it's really the same as existing.
Works. That's it.
Okay. All right. Come on back.
I'll get it pulled up.
Okay. Oh, you can see it behind.
Yeah. Apologize, there's some issues with the TV. We're probably getting a new one in a few months.
Okay, great. So much the same as the Bellagio, the Vintage Inn has a lot of opportunities, and our client team asked us to create a new street frontage that was respectful of the existing trees that are on the particular site, but that again, update it, refresh it, sort of tie it into the town of Yountville today. So it has a similar sort of agrarian style, a different mood though from the finishes. It's more of a sort of contemporary country cottage. It's got a fresh white finish that's reflected both on the interior and on the exterior. There's existing brick that's on the building that we're actually going to not paint white, that we'd like to leave in place, that reflects the existing building, and I think our new rendering that's updated. But the majority of the facade that you see will sort of have this white cottage effect. It'll have a board and batten siding, a metal roof, and the intent again is to create this pedestrian-friendly, welcoming, sort of warm front door to the Vintage Inn. So this is the existing facade is what you see on the upper exhibit. Currently, you walk in the front door through the arched opening, and there is a certain reception desk and flow. What we're proposing now is to modify that flow slightly, in that we're pushing the front desk back to the sort of plan west here, so the western facade here underneath the dormer, that'll be the primary arrival and front door. The larger double height space, so the larger gable element that has more glass, is more of an indoor-outdoor connection to the lobby lounge, and those will be operable doors with metal arbor above that divides the transom, so there'll be a door height that matches the existing colonnade that's there, and then there'll be transom windows above that's separated by that metal arbor. You'll also notice that the roof line has slightly changed from the existing roofs that there. Right now it's a hip roof condition, and we're proposing a gable end condition that will allow us to insert windows and transom windows at both ends of the building to get natural light into the public spaces. The existing colonnade and porch that wraps around the building will remain. Those are actually wood columns, and we'll simply paint those to match. And then we're proposing a standing seam metal roof. So this is again a conceptual view that's mostly about the architecture here, not necessarily about the lighting, about the landscape, and the auto court. But again, we're trying to create a sense of welcoming and a new front door for the Vintage Inn. We're creating an auto court that will have, in this particular rendering, there'll be one more hole in the stone wall that would lead guests who are either checking in or arriving or departing the hotel back to the front desk. And the intent is to really create this sort of transparent open space again to take advantage of the fabulous weather that we have here and create a real connection to the community and to Washington Street. And that's all of our...
Okay. Questions? Park the turnaround. Mikhail, you want to start this time? Sure.
So I may have just misunderstood at one point. You said some of the brick was going to be maintained, the non-white.
So it's in this particular rendering. Let's just go to the existing condition. So the brick that's sort of to the it's actually the southern side of the building, but the facade to the left of the sheet here up above, all of that will remain, mm-hmm. and it actually remains in the rendering that we have below. It's just painted white.
Okay. So
our current idea is to treat that brick, but maintain the brick look, feel, texture, because that's consistent also with the existing brick that's on the guest room buildings beyond.
Just the little part of brick that sticks out beyond that last column.
Actually, all the way to where the new gable is. So on there, Nathan, if you could just go to the right, keep going down below. So that'll all be brick lower, and then that new gable ending would be white, as well as the existing dormer that's above.
So all that brick, all the way up to where the board and batten is going to remain unpainted.
It would be treated, probably slightly different than this, but yeah, it'll have sort of this efflorescence, sort of it's.
So will it look like
a more vintage feel? Let's put it that way.
Will it look like brick?
Yes.
Or will it look like painted white brick?
No, it'll look like brick. It'll just be sort of more distressed, I guess you'd call it that.
If you look really closely at the rendering, you can see the brick detail.
You can, but it looks
there.
Like white painted brick.
You can see that brick.
It does.
Yeah,
it does. I think our intent is to keep more of the existing brick that's there.
Okay.
In that it looks like red brick, but it has maybe more efflorescence or more of a white tone to it. And then the rest of the building that's new, the new gable portions, the existing dormers above would have a vertical board and batten siding.
Okay.
And the fireplace looks like, or the chimney, I'm sorry, it looks like it has the same texture as the brick. Is that going to?
So the existing chimney that's there, I believe it is a stucco finish.
Okay.
It would remain, but it would not be the. If it was brick, it would remain brick. But if it's stucco or wood or something like that, it'll get painted white.
Okay.
And our idea is to really emphasize that fireplace as a focal element, both inside and outside of the building, where now it's sort of pinched off by the end of that hip roof.
Okay, and then there's plans for seating on the right side under that overhang?
Well,
It's kind of an outdoor lounge?
there's existing seating
Okay.
that's there now, so it would just continue as that. But it's really quite narrow, so it's really only like a two-top or something.
Yeah,
and
that's
it's
what-
sort of just casual seating that's there. The real seating is actually in back adjacent to the pool.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you were planning on making like a lounge type scenario, like at Bellagio. Or
It's slightly different than Bellagio in that there's not a bar and there's not sort of the same sort of interior amenities, so it's mostly just casual seating around the exterior.
Perfect. That's all I had.
Okay, Barbara?
Yeah, I want to go back to the parking at the front.
Sure.
Yeah.
Whoops, wrong way.
Yeah.
Here.
This one.
Yes.
How you get in and out, how the traffic is going to flow on that?
So there's an existing curb cut that's there that we'll maintain, and so we'll have a turning radius where you pull in, you'll turn to the right, you'll exit out of your car. So that ideally the passenger side is adjacent to the front door, so that you can exit. You can get under the existing colonnade and porch that's there if it's inclement weather, and then you can continue onto the front desk.
So the same curb serves exit and entry.
There's actually two curb cuts that are actually close together in that particular location. That one you sort of veer in and it kind of makes a left turn next to the Grosvenor House, and then there's one more on the other side of an existing. I think there's an existing tree that's there. It probably shows up on the site plan. The curb cut locations will remain the same. It's
Okay.
both in and out for the balance of the property.
Okay.
And I think that probably the same comments about the circulation that we had about the on Bellagio probably would be applicable here.
Okay. It's not a very big space, so you will not be able to park there.
Once again, it's sort of a pause or a transition space for parking, and we're trying to eliminate. There's 3 spaces there now, and we're trying to get rid of people trying to park there. It's just sort of momentary to make a transition to either depart or arrive at the hotel.
Okay. I'm good.
Okay. I have the same question of how you will integrate this into the rest of the buildings on the property?
So again, that's why we'll be changing the roof here. The rest of the property is going through a complete renovation. So the lobby building and all the balance of the guest rooms will have a similar sort of theme. We'll also be designing its own sort of landscape component to it. Probably share a lot of commonalities that you see at the Bellagio, but it'll have its own distinct sort of character. And and there'll be a consistency of both finish and furnishings, etc., between the guest rooms and the lobby building. And I think keeping that existing brick that's there and sort of keeping it the same color as what you find on the balance of the property will be the same.
Okay.
So
Karen?
it'll all be white.
Mhm.
Okay. In looking at this, just to clarify, the lobby entrance is not that larger windowed
That's correct.
portico.
That's correct.
The main entrance is going to that space, so you want people to divert to the left to go into that smaller doorway?
Yeah, so the flow in your floor plans, the front desk is actually shifted further back.
Right.
And so we want to direct people into the front desk to check in, and then they'll circulate through the lobby lounge to the double height space. And if you remember, there's a series of meeting rooms that we're going to maintain up above, but we're going to open those up with glazing and things, so there's a more clear communication between the first level and that mezzanine level.
So will those doors actually be mobile? They'll be indoor, outdoor?
They'll be operable. So the idea is that we can open that up, and we can we can
they'll
have
be, like,
casual.
bending or-
Yeah. Probably not a nano wall system. They could be like a French door, but something that you can have those open, and when it's nice weather, it sort of blurs the line between the lobby and the outdoor terrace.
And then the usage of the space in the front, with that front, it looks like a little wall, a mini wall, I guess. What is the purpose of that?
That's
you're
just
trying
a-
to enclose in there? Because it's
we're
not
just-
the
we're-
driveway, right?
That's just the parking court, so that's sort of the
okay.
turnaround. So we're just kind of creating a differentiation between the vehicular space and the pedestrian space.
Any more questions? Carrie?
So, how are you using the extra 41 square feet in the lobby? Is it just to bump the front out?
I think the calculation there, it's a little bit to bump the front out so that facade is exposed. But if you actually look in the plans, it's not usable square footage. It's just a thickening of the facade because we're going to maintain the existing footings that are there. So we're just adding on this gable as a piece.
Okay, so it'll be like 2 feet deep by 20 feet wide, give or take.
Our intent
41 feet,
with both
yeah.
of these projects was not to add any FAR or coverage or further impact that. So I think it's just the way that our calculations happen to arrive with that small bump out for the gable ending. But we need some way to make that transition around the corner. So we needed a bit of massing to do that. But we're trying to make that negligible.
Okay, and then you're going to add 151 square feet to the second floor, right?
That's right, and that's really a function of pushing the roof out as 2 gable ends that allows for that extra area. And we've actually added, I think we've actually added a bit more on a few more windows on the dormer that's there. You see, the dormer is slightly wider, and there's increased level of glazing at that meeting space mezzanine above.
Okay. So what is happening to the staging kitchen? I'm all curious about it.
The existing functionality of the space will remain as it is. We're not changing that.
Okay, because it doesn't. Okay, so it's just the kitchen on the proposed, not the staging kitchen. Okay. And you're enlarging interior, you're enlarging the bar and lounge area?
Just the lobby lounge, by pushing back the front desk, we have larger space for the lounge.
Do you have those two up there side by side? Oh, thanks.
I do on my
This
PowerPoint.
is, oh, I'm on Bellagio. Sorry. Okay. So what's the big space in the middle when you walk in the proposed? There's a reception desk on one end, the lobby on the other.
Right.
There's a big square in the middle.
So that's a stair and a lift to get you to the mezzanine above. So,
No, next to the stair.
next to the stair, I think that's just an air.
That's a Turkish rug.
That's an area rug with furnishings that sit on top of it. So it's.
I was so close to
You're
right
right.
on that.
Yeah, it could be.
Okay. So I think that's all I have, but with the continuing concerns about landscaping, lighting, parking, etc. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does any public have any comments on this item before we move on? Okay, we will move on to discussing it amongst ourselves. Mikhail, comments?
Honestly, I think it's a vast improvement of what it is today. Again, for me, it's pretty much the same thing, minus the lighting so much. I mean, these small walks down the path are fine, but the landscaping and the parking, I guess. Again, I don't echo the board's concern as much with the parking, but it's valid if we're going to have them represent for the landscaping and the other aspects. We might as well look at parking too.
Okay, Barbara?
Yes, the landscaping, I think right now the property has very lush landscaping. They take a lot of water. I've seen the water running down the street, the sidewalk. I hope your new landscaping will minimize the problem and also save some water with the new drought tolerance and designs and all that we have available right now. That would be great. Because and also I think that will complement your new design, the new landscaping. That's what I hope. Thank you.
My comments are that I loved individually the architecture of the building. I think it's a beautiful building. I cannot support this in this location. To me, it is too strong, too different to the surrounding area. It's too drastic. It's cold. It's harsh. I think it's a beautiful building in the wrong place, is my opinion. I don't think it fits that property at all. I think it changes the character of the town much more than the last one. The last one, the Bellagio remodel, is an update of the warmth that's already there with the addition and the answering the questions of the landscaping. This one is a beautiful building. I just cannot support it in that location. To me, it's not the right thing for our town. It changes the character of it too much. And in all of our strategic goals and in our municipal code, we were always talking about buildings that add to the character of the town, support the character of the town, contribute to the small rural town character, things that are uniquely Yountville, and I don't think I can agree that this does. So
Is it the color?
the color, it's just too harsh, too dry, too hard, especially for that location. Oh, your comment? Gary?
Oh, I was looking at her.
Oh.
Microphone.
I like the architecture. I think the whiteness of it, it's in stark contrast to what it is currently. So you used to have that warmth of the brick, and now we're talking about having it, white, bleached out, or painted, or so maybe that kind of lends a little bit to
And taking the two
starkness.
beautiful Japanese maples, although you mentioned saving the trees, the two beautiful trees that soften it are leaving.
Are they saving them?
No.
Oh, okay. I think this rendition makes it look a little bit stark because there is no landscaping there currently.
Whatsoever.
And so it does look a little stark, I guess. But from a design standpoint, I do like it. And I think what it is currently in comparison to what it could be is an improvement. So I could see maybe the color being a little bit of an issue, if anything.
That it?
That's it.
Okay. Carrie?
So many pretty pictures here. I do like it as a building, and I really had not thought until Member Cook said of how it looks on the site, really, and I can see the validity of her statement. And I'm now trying to feature the white piece next to a red or off-red piece of the brick. As I understand it, will remain more the color it is now, kind of this pinky red. And I'm assuming a brown roof. I think it's just really difficult to conceptualize because when you drive up to it now, it is heavily treed, it is heavily shaded, it is really wonderfully inviting and like an oasis. I hear what you're saying this evening, that is your intention to continue that. But I also think, as you said, budget is always a consideration, and I think putting in mature trees after the fact might be the thing that gets cut out of the budget. So And I'm also thinking the double glass, maybe that's what makes it look more modern and more stark than might lend itself to the site. So I don't know how important that piece is. I don't know if that would assuage any of the other members or make a difference to them. I'm just very, I was reluctant on Bellagio, and I'm reluctant here to send it to the town council saying we recommend it, but we need to see lighting, landscaping, and parking, because that just leaves a lot open to interpretation, and I think could lead to problems down the road. Because if we approve this tonight, and then applicant says we can't put in mature trees, we have to put in 6 crepe myrtles, then that's going to make a dramatic difference in how the building looks on the site and how the site looks when you walk and drive through our town.
Yeah, the wide entry walkway is just pavers right up to the wall, and then the carport, and it just dramatically changes the flavor, the character of the town too much for me. But
I think though in looking at Stuart Cellars, which is very modern, I think, the same essence of floor to ceiling type windows, same idea. The only difference is the finish, right? So I think maybe the issue in here is the finish.
I like to address the location if it's a concern, because Heston, right across the street, it was quite a change for the rest of the neighborhood, and I think it turned out quite stunning with all the new material and the metal. It was very masculine at the time, does not fit the neighborhood. Everybody else was the brick and the old-fashioned. But I think the neighborhood is changing. Because of Heston, you can't say that this one doesn't fit the neighborhood. It is already in the neighborhood. That's just my view of it.
Heston is one of those that, to me, in my view, is exactly the same thing. It's a beautiful building in the wrong place. And I don't want to do that again. But that's just my opinion.
Right.
Anybody have any other thoughts? Anybody want to recommend a way to phrase it for town council? What the majority feels?
May I ask the applicant another question?
Sure.
Is there a way to save the trees? I mean, you're taking out at Bellagio 15 cypresses and this many trees, and here you're taking out the Japanese maples and so many cypresses. I mean, when you drive in
All
there,
the plantings.
it's lovely. And really, y'all are just, I understand you're going to put something back, but hopefully you understand our trepidation about what that will be.
Yeah.
Why can't we save what is there?
Well, I think that's a good comment. How many trees can we save? What's there? I think the reality is we need a landscape plan that shows this is existing and this is proposed and this is the size and the canopy, and if the message is the intent is to maintain the look and feel and the setback and sort of the layering that the landscape provides, I think that's a valid comment. I think specifically tonight, the 2 projects that we've shown have been more of an architectural review versus a landscape or a landscape review. That might that's just sort of the exhibits that we presented. So having a series of trees sort of covering the building and then kind of hiding things behind it causes a lot of questions. But I think they're all valid comments. And specifically to the architecture, if it's, I think it could be sort of a finish issue. Maybe it's too white. It's a sort of white cottage building as we're seeing it. Something that's actually, it might seem more masculine, but the interiors is actually, I think, more feminine. It's softer. Maybe if it was gray, maybe if it was a slight finish that might have a different feel. I think maintaining as many of the existing trees would be helpful. But I think we can't tell the whole story until we have a landscape plan that then supports the building architecture. But from an architectural perspective, I think that the amount of glazing of sitting inside the building and looking up at the mountains beyond and the distant views and all the things that that surround the environment of the building will be quite elegant and add a lot of value beyond the sort of heavy sloping interior roofs that are there today. In addition, with the gable endings, some more glazing that looks out into the beautiful existing trees that are surrounding the property. It sort of brings the outside in. So. It might feel slightly different if it was maybe less white, maybe less stark, and I think that's a valid comment. I think maintaining the brick, but not the pinkish brick tone, is an important thought. And the roof is a metal roof it's sort of a gray metal roof, not it's not a brown roof in this case. So I think all of that composition of materials could work to maybe soften an architecture that is interesting but maybe somehow feels foreign to the town.
Okay.
And I think there's just a basic tension in your folks and your guests and our guests to the town, sitting inside a beautiful place like this and looking out and what they can see and what it frames for them versus all of us who, both residents and tourists, walking by and what we see and what it frames for us. I mean, that's a divergent viewpoint, literally. And
our job is
figuratively.
to view it from the outside.
Right, and our job is to walk down the street. And I think we've discussed Heston, we've discussed Stuart. Those are right up on the sidewalk. And that makes a difference too. This and Bellagio, they both enjoy a lovely setback. Then we have talked at length at other meetings that is one thing we want to preserve in this town is the green space setback feeling as we, both residents and tourists, walk through. So that's, I think, where the majority of us are probably coming from when we talk about landscaping so much.
And I think for us, we're just, the intent was to create, right now the building is completely sort of hidden from sight with all the existing trees that there. It feels almost overgrown. And there's a small walkway through some hedges with some beautiful roses, but somehow I don't think that view speaks to the architecture and the ethos that you're creating along Washington Street with all of the developments. It's more of a clearer dialogue between the streets and the architecture that surrounds it, and we have a substantial setback that we can continue to develop sort of a layering of landscaping. And I think that's what's missing here is the landscape, the actual landscaping design that goes with it, with the architecture and how those two play together to soften some of that perspective. But they're all valid points, and I appreciate your perspective.
Yeah, because I don't think there's this one. I don't see a problem with that one being buried behind landscaping. To me, this one is just too, hey, look at me. It has too much of an ego for that location. And I think that's what bothers me. I don't see a problem with something being tucked into a quaint little town and not trying to say, hey, look what I've done to the town. So,
I mean, I personally, I almost agree that I do think it's hidden. Like, I know plenty of people that walk by and have no idea what it is, what's back there. They don't know where the vintage is in currently. And the landscaping is great, and I think to the applicant's point, I think so much is left to be determined by what this looks like. I mean, honestly, if you toss in a row of olive trees on either side of that pathway, it automatically softens everything up and it changes dramatically. But to his point, if you have trees on this diagram, it also blocks the design element that we're supposed to be looking at tonight. With that said, it is a very stark color, which I think we've all kind of brought up and agreed on. But in terms of the overall project, I mean, I think this more than the previous one for me, the landscaping plan is that vital to this project, because Until you said it, I actually didn't think about how it would look on that specific piece of land. But there is some quaintness to the trees and elements. But yeah, I love the design. Again, I just think the landscape on this is definitely more important than the other. Yeah.
Okay.
So, as a point for discussion, on the Vintage Inn, would it be better to say to council, we cannot recommend it until we see something more than a conceptual landscape plan, because we feel the importance of the site?
I would agree with that, but
To see something more than a conceptual.
Yes,
right
to
now we
see
don't have
some
any
actual,
conceptual,
we're going to
so maybe
save
we
these
can
trees, we're going to
conceptual.
add these trees.
maybe soften the
This is going
look.
to happen.
Yeah.
This,
So why that and not this?
and to
one?
see maybe a gray, maybe, because there is a lot going on if you have the pink brick, the white, the gray roof. I mean, maybe the color would be revisited, maybe not.
Do people agree with that
Just as a
statement?
point for discussion.
Yeah.
Not advocating one way.
Right.
I guess I'm trying to think, like, with this recommendation to town council, how much weight is being put on this from us? You know, is this like saying, okay, ZDRB said yes, they love this? Are they done, stamped and approved, or are they going into
It's
the
our-
same
it's
discussion
our
we're
job.
doing? Okay. Then yeah, I would want to see more of an updated draft with all of the changes that we've kind of discussed.
Okay.
What are the changes, I guess? I'm not very clear.
A lighting plan, a landscape plan, answering some questions on parking.
So we're not changing.
And the color.
But we're not sending this to town council with our approval. We're saying we need to see those things before we can approve it.
But we're not asking them to change the design of the building or
That's
the
up to
structure.
them to decide how to present it to us, given the concerns we voiced. What would they get to decide what they want to change.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is just that we're going to further into the landscaping and the lighting and the parking. So we're not touching on the structure or the design of the building, are we?
Well, we've told them our concerns that we don't feel it fits in. So they could bring it back identical with some planting, or they can make an adjustment to the colors or the architecture to soften it along with the planting. We're leaving that up to them.
And correct me if I'm wrong, they can still just present to town
As
council,
is.
right? As is.
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
So yeah, that my recommendation would be that it be represented to us with the concerns we have addressed. And if they choose to present to town council as is, then that's their choice.
It goes with our non-recommendation. Does that work? Do we need to vote on it?
We need to have a motion, a second, and a vote.
Okay. So can we take that as a motion? I'll second that. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Barbara's opposed. Okay. Thank you for your time.
The staff will follow up with you tomorrow about what next steps are.
I know. Ay, 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 we're not even done yet. Does anybody need a break?
No.
Okay. Did you say yes? Okay.
No one else wants to.
Okay. Thank you. Have a good evening. Okay, we will move on to the next subject on our agenda, 16-921, the discussion on open space and floor area ratio.
All right. Are we having fun?
No. Frankly.
Okay. Open space floor area ratio. Just as a quick reminder, May 17th, there was a combined meeting between the ZDRB and the town council. During this combined meeting, a number of topics were discussed. Among them was the difference between open space and floor area ratio, FAR. FAR, as you know, is a definition found in the zoning ordinance. It refers to the gross floor area of a building on a lot divided by the gross area of the lot. So, for example, if one lot had a required FAR of 1, that means 100% of that lot may be covered. So if it's a 1,000 square foot lot, if it has a FAR of 1, you could put in a 1,000 square foot building and fit the requirement. Or it could be a 2-story building that each story is 500 square feet. So that's how FAR works. Open space simply means any yard or setback or courtyard, usable open space, landscaping, really anything. Ultimately, it's the opposite of FAR. FAR is what is the building. Open space is what is not the building. So during this combined meeting, May 17th, there was a discussion between the ZDRB and the town council about what the town's goals are. What do we want to see regarding the standards of open space and FAR? The bodies generally agreed that use area, even if it's outside, particularly if it's outside, should not be incorporated into an FAR calculation. So if it was an outside dining area, say at Hurley's, you know how they have those outside dining areas? It's not part of the building, so therefore it should not be calculated in the FAR for that site. That was the overall general consensus of both the council and the ZDRB at that meeting. However, even though, mainly because it didn't affect the building massing, however, that use should trigger a parking requirement because it is now part of their use. So whether it's extra seats for a dining operation or if it's the extra square footage for a retail or wine tasting operation, it should be incorporated. Or that was the consensus of the ZDRB and town council. So the reason we brought it back before you, A, because we said we would, B, there's clearly some changes to the municipal code that need to occur. And so, though we could take this in 1,000 different directions, we wanted to try and just focus on 2 that needed a little bit more discussion. And staff, frankly, needed a little bit more input from the board before we could even draft an ordinance. So first, for future discussion, was related to just the definitions within the ordinance. So the definitions, there was this consensus between the two bodies that there needs to be a clear separation between FAR and open space. There was some consensus, though not by everyone, admittedly, that there should be separate definitions for usable open space, like courtyards, versus non-usable open space, like landscaping. The definitions could also take into account whether the open space may be secured after the business is closed to prohibit access. There's several property owners that have raised this issue of potential liability. Oftentimes when we talk about the open space, our automatic thought is, oh, so it's like a park. Anyone can go there whenever they want. And if open space is simply the opposite of FAR, well, a residence's backyard is like that open space, but obviously you aren't allowed to come into my backyard. It's my backyard. Should commercial developments operate the same way? Or, because it's commercial, should all of their open space be automatically public? That is something for the board to discuss. The town council has not generally been open to allowing businesses to use gates or other measures to prohibit access. However, at some, like Priest Ranch, they were granted the approval to install a gate at the bottom of stairs to limit access to the rooftop, even though the rooftop was this open area. After hours, because of the liability, they were permitted to install a gate so people wouldn't just be hanging out on the roof after hours. On the same note of open space being open and inviting, a general theme of the combined meeting was that it wasn't widely known that a lot of these open spaces are even available to the public. For instance, few people know that the deck in front of Gerard or the courtyard there next to Priest Ranch are open for anyone to enjoy. Usually there's the impression of, oh, well, I'm not a customer, so I'd feel very awkward sitting there. So the first issue for discussion with that should be whether it's reasonable to even have the requirement that the open space should be available to the public. Is that appropriate that the town places that requirement on commercial developments? Staff has heard that the public is not comfortable using outdoor spaces that are clearly associated with the businesses. So is it even appropriate? Courtyards and patios that are filled with people usually contribute in a positive way to the streetscape. That's one advantage of having these decks and patios and courtyards available to the public, because it's a better feeling in the town and to walk up and down the sidewalk and see people out enjoying this space. If it is private and only meant for the customers, there's a potential that those courtyards would seem vacant and not used. The second issue for discussion, let's assume that the outdoor areas are open to the public at large. Should signage requirements be put into place, like small, subtle language that says all seating is open to the public, or this space is open space? Is that signage appropriate? So, to summarize that definitions section, public access, site security, and signage. Those are the three main discussion points that we'd like to see the board discuss to address that.
Can we say those one more time? Public access.
Yeah.
Yes, it's on page 3 of the staff report, but it's public access, site security, like safety, liability, and signage. Those are the big three, if you will. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to move on to parking, unless you wanted to talk about that first, and then I can talk about parking. What would you prefer?
I'd rather do them separate.
Okay, go for it.
Okay. Okay, stopping right there before parking. Does anybody have any comments, questions of staff? I'm getting tired.
Understandable.
About what we're going to discuss.
What is it that you want from us?
That's my question. Yeah, there you go. That's my first question.
So right now,
Where would you like for us to conclude?
let me walk you through the
10
process.
o'clock.
An applicant comes in and says, hey, here's a parcel here in town. I want to build whatever on it. Like, let's say a wine tasting room on this parcel. They look at the requirements and say, okay, if I meet FAR, so I won't take up more than 25% of the parcel, and X amount, let's say 20%, is going to be this courtyard open space area. That leaves extra room. Something like parking or a trash enclosure isn't included as open space nor FAR, because no one's going to say, oh boy, I love hanging out in this parking lot. It adds so much to the beauty of the. No one says that. But it also doesn't affect the building massing. So it's this nebulous in-between stage. So then they come up with this plan that meets both the FAR requirements and the open space requirements. Should the use of that outdoor area be considered in their development plan? Right now, it isn't really, unless they say, well, I want to make it also an art gallery, and I'm going to put all my art pieces that are for sale out in that courtyard. Well,
Well, it is considered part of their application, because we're saying, currently we say you have to put in open space, but you can't pour wine out there.
correct.
So it is
Is that,
regulated.
should it be?
That has occurred based on an interpretation of FAR and whether outdoor use areas are FAR. And from the joint meeting, we heard positive feedback that we should move beyond that that blending that's occurred. Is that really what's the purpose of the FAR regulation? Is it to regulate massing? Well, yes, then we shouldn't apply it to use areas that are used for a business. But because of that interpretation, we very narrowly limited our businesses' use of outdoor space because they build a site to the maximum FAR, and so they simply can't use that space. And in this hospitality industry that we have here, and even based on these last applications where they're trying to blend the indoor and the outdoor spaces because the climate is so wonderful and people want to spend time outside, do we want to penalize the use of that outdoor space? We were doing so with FAR. We're potentially doing so by also requiring that they be open to the public and that they can't secure their properties after dark because it has this, the open space has this quality that it's open to the public. And so do we want open space to be about landscaping and providing areas that guests to this city use? And so we have active streetscapes that are positive and beneficial to the town, that because they're so active, it actually encourages people to park their cars and go afoot. Those are some of the questions we're throwing out there.
Okay, so we'll stop and just talk about that one thing at a time here. Anybody have any more questions? I mean, we can just make this a conversation. with
Of
you guys,
course.
right?
Yeah.
My only thing would be, does the member of the public want to make a comment on this portion of it? Okay. Okay. I mean, to me, the point of the FAR and this open space requirement is exactly what you stated, that it's to protect the massing. It's makes a more attractive street. It makes a more attractive. That's part of what Weonville is it's not building fronts.
Right.
It has a building and an outdoor space. To me, that's very logical, and it's very logical to restrict the use, because when you approve more use, in the way it is managed now, you're inviting more people and more parking and more cars, and that has to be addressed.
Let's not talk about parking. We decided to save that for the next
Yeah, that's
discussion.
second.
Yeah,
If
but
we let
that's
that
tied
limit
into
this
this.
discussion, we won't be able to move beyond it, I think, because that parking issue looms, right?
Because that's actually what happened in the combined meeting. We introduced
Yeah, and
one
we got
thing,
off on
and
parking.
parking dominated probably 85% of the open space FAR conversation.
So
If
maybe
you
just-
can, try to talk about how you'd like to see outdoor space used, both for businesses, whether you think it should be open to the public, and the types of restrictions that would be appropriate to have a lively streetscape.
Okay, Mikhail?
Because we've already addressed the issue of FAR and open space. That's positive.
Yeah, so I'm in agreement with the first part of your FAR's building mass, open spaces is kind of just the opposite of FAR. And I am not in the belief that the use of that open space should play into whether or not it impacts the FAR. That was part of the conversation, right? Also, if the business is going to have to pick up the liability of the public using that open space after hours, then I think they should have the right to shut it off after hours. And one that comes to mind is, let's say R&D kitchen is closed, people go out and start hanging out around those fire pits, someone is drunk and falls or something, hits their head, is R&D then liable for that accident? So no, I think they should have the right to say you're not allowed on this property. Now, if during business operations they want to allow the public to enjoy the space and hopefully that transacts into more interaction with the brand, then more power to them. But I don't think it should be a requirement that we force them to take on the liability of having the public use their space, which would then play into the after hours. Which would then play into the signage piece that I don't think they should have signage up, promoting that this is open space, please sit here.
Regardless if it's public or private, no signage?
No.
Okay.
But you have to do something after hours to restrict entry. There has to be some signage.
Well, I think they
Something
can
for that.
secure the property.
Like R&D, you can't really secure that patio. You can put up things that tell people they can't come in, like a rope or,
You can put out
True.
signage to say no public access
After.
after
Well, I think we don't mandate them to go above and beyond to welcome people there after hours, but we also don't mandate them to say stay out. If they want to take on that extra liability of having no signs and allowing people to come and sit down after hours, then I think that's their choice. But I wouldn't really mandate a sign either way.
If it's after hours and people go on their own accord to R&D Kitchen and they sit there and they get into an accident, it's not the liability of R&D Kitchen. It's after hours. It's trespassing almost, isn't it, at that point?
Well, then that brings us to the question, is it public access? Should we require that it be public?
No.
Like that Girard deck, it's, even when Girard is closed, it's public access, and rightfully, I could go and enjoy a 2 o'clock in the morning snack on there if I wanted to.
So, right, and you're doing that on your own. You're doing that on your own.
But if the town has conditioned that space as public open space, what are the restrictions on the public using it at any and all times?
That's more of a legal question. I mean, if it's considered open public space according to the town, and somebody goes onto the property and falls, then is it the town's liability because you've declared that an open public space?
Do you think during business hours that the public should be able to go onto a business property and just park themselves and sit and read a
No.
book? Or should it be available for the use of their
No.
customers and guests?
I
And
think
perhaps
open
incidental
space does not
use?
equate to public space. I guess that's more, there's open space like a park, and I think it's very clear that it's for the public. And then there's open space on somebody's business, which is in the confines of somebody's business parameters. You know what I mean?
So,
Just because it's in an open outdoor space, like, you know, if there's a pathway, and the really great example is that pathway between Jessup Cellars going out to the back, and they were talking about putting a little gate there or something. I use that path all the time, and I was kind of like, oh my God, they're going to put, you know, they might put that gate, and then, but I always walk that path. You know, it's like, well, then I'll just walk around the other way. It's not like make or break. It's
their property,
You know, it's their
yeah.
property.
so
how-
it's the prerogative of the business how public they want to make their space.
Now, if they were to
That-
build a fortress and a 5-foot wall around it, and you know shrubs, you know, up, you know, that's where there would be an issue. But if they're not doing anything that's kind of inhibiting the feel of the open space, you know what I mean?
And
it's their space.
To that point, similar to the first application that came in, where it's technically open space, right? Because it's not fully enclosed, but it added to the building massing, which I
Yeah,
think
that's-
is what you were getting at.
So is open space currently defined in our code?
It's pretty limited, the definition.
Where is it defined? I only,
I always have to go back and
I didn't
forth.
wanna
I would
spend my
start
afternoon
with
looking for it.
definitions. There is a definition in open space.
because
It's
I think
lousy.
it would be good for us to know what we're dealing with, and so I would like to
What
know,
you created.
we've seen the
pull it up.
definition of FAR. If you
It's
find
here in the
definition
staff
of open
report.
Yeah,
space-
it's open space is any yard
Where are you?
setback on the first page of the staff report. Unfortunately, I didn't cite a part of the code.
Right, see, I didn't know if that was our code or if it was just what we think of open
Yeah,
space.
but it simply means a yard setback, courtyard, usable open space or area not covered by buildings, parking, or refuse service areas.
So it is somewhere in the code, is this definition?
The first chapter of the zoning ordinance has definitions, and this is one of the definitions. This
Okay.
definition has morphed over time through town council policy in approving projects, and that's why we saw the connection first with FAR, then with it being public usable open space rather than business open space.
So
And
it's
so that's
seven-
what we're looking to try to clean up.
So it's 17.08.010.
Yes.
And it doesn't reference public access.
No, but then we
The
also
definition.
have a chapter on landscaping and open space, and they do discuss usable and non-usable open space and this public concept.
So that was my second question, is where, let's say on a Girard, for example, or a Jessup, where is it memorialized that Girard's deck and Jessup's patio must be open to the public?
Simply in
their
the use permit.
So that's in the use permit. Okay.
And it's written as public open space, correct? In use permits?
The use permit, it's different in the different businesses, but in that Girard case, it's explicit, the deck shall be open to the public.
So it's the R&D area outside?
Yes.
Okay.
So they
So
agree with
that's-
us in their permit. I mean,
That's where, so open space becomes extended space for them, for the business, if you not let public access.
If it's so said in the use permit, because, and that's when we would get more into parking, the use permit would determine what areas of the entire property, indoors or outdoors, that the business would be using. That's defined in the use permit.
Right. So currently, since open space is available to the public, businesses haven't been able to do formal wine tastings, bring food out to their
Seated,
guests, so their
yeah.
use of the space is limited. If that were to open up for better and more active use of the space, then we need to look at things like parking. But before we even get to that question is, do we want our businesses to, let's say, have the exclusive use of their open space for their business? How important is it to have this public link,
Would it,
if at all?
I almost see, I think Carrie or Councilman Laz mentioned this, where it's two separate definitions. You have open space, which is the opposite of FAR, and then you have public open space and private open space. And however that's deemed outlined in the use permit is what that is then held to.
Should there be a requirement that a development has a certain amount of public versus private open space, or should the town even be involved in that?
I don't think so. I
No.
think open space, yes. Public, no.
I
For
think
that,
I
li-
think
liability
that's when it
reasons.
gets into the use permit is like, okay, if you want this to be public open space or
Yeah.
private open space where you're operating your business, then it's going to add to your
FAR.
your parking requirements versus, not to segue into parking.
No, we can move on whenever you want to.
But if it's public open space, then that wouldn't necessarily translate into additional parking spots.
To me, public open space implies it's the town's open space. It's for the public, like it's a park. That's a public open space, and anyone can go and can feel free to be there. A public open space for a private entity, it's incongruent, really. It doesn't, I don't think it, I would not sign the permit, my use permit saying, oh, okay, and then like 25% of my space, the public can be there and I take on that liability. I'd be like, no. So, I mean, part of it might be that they signed into a use permit that maybe they shouldn't have.
Maybe we're making it too complicated. Maybe the answer is you have 1,000 square foot lot. You can cover 250 square feet of it, right, with a building. If 100 of those square feet is a patio and you intend to use it, whether you're going to stack your stuff on it or you're going to stack your patrons on it, and you intend to use it, then it's included in the FAR.
It's in your FAR.
That's right.
So you do want to include it in the
No.
No.
Well, I wouldn't, if you're going to use
It's
it.
but the
that's
FAR
a
is
that's
meant
enough.
for
Mass.
building massing.
Okay, sorry. But
can
still,
address
I
it through
stand by.
parking.
I still stand by it. I think it's simpler than we're making it. You have your FAR, and then if you have, so let's go back to my example. You have a 250 square foot building, and then you put a 100 square foot patio on it, which is not included in the FAR.
Correct.
But if you're going to use it, then that triggers everything else that's attendant to what's going on inside your four walls. It's just like you had 350 square feet enclosed for use purposes.
That's
That
usage.
gets more complicated.
Right.
That
But I'm
is-
saying maybe we don't need to say open space, public space. It's just,
You have FAR and you have open space.
Why do we even
And then you
need
have
open
use
space?
area. Yeah.
Because of the
the
map board.
negative of FAR is de facto open space.
Because
and
we're
if-
trying to avoid massing.
Right, that's why
But
it's
it's-
within your FAR.
No, let's use Bellagio as an example. With open space, we require landscaping as part of it. It doesn't mean that you can come in and pave everything over and have only courtyards and patios or auto courts that, may be open and not built upon, so it's not FAR. But by having open space, it allows us to have spaces that people like to be in. It has landscaping, it has the variety. It can even have the courtyards and the patios.
So what is the current requirement for open space? If FAR
The
is
sliding scale
0.25.
based on size of the lot, from 10 to 20%, I think.
Okay, thank you.
So, open space requirement, yes. Public access, no. Signage required, saying it's public, no, because we're not saying public. They're allowed to do close off their space in the PM if they want to, within,
It's entirely up to them.
yeah, how they want to close it in. And site security then becomes their
property.
issue, because they're deciding if they're letting people in or not. Do you fall asleep? Fall over? Does everybody agree with that?
Well, I have a question about signage for safety, security. You don't want signage to say it's a public space for everybody to come in to use, but you could put a signage said no public access after 10 o'clock or whatever.
That's up to
Would
them.
that be an insurance buffer for them for security?
Well, those are legal issues. So I
That's
don't
up
know
to
Yeah.
if I
the
have
property
the
owner.
answer.
Okay.
Okay.
But if they want to put on the sign, they have to be approved.
Yeah. Okay, so we get all those.
Can't get too involved with content.
Yeah. So we got those all.
Okay, so that feels like general consensus. That's actually the conversation we wanted. So
Yeah.
Good.
thank you.
Okay.
This is
Parking.
answering. Good. Okay, moving to parking.
Yeah.
Okay. So another theme during the meeting was all about parking. A lot of members of the board, as well as the town council, wanted to see a study on the impact of driverless cars or ride-sharing programs such as Uber or Lyft. And though there haven't been many studies on this, there has been some evidence to show that things like Uber or Lyft, those ride-sharing apps or programs, how they affect parking. Some have claimed that these services result in cars driving throughout neighborhoods or parking on Washington Street for hours looking for a customer. But that might be more prevalent in larger, more urban environments than in Yountville. That clearly is more the case in the Oaklands and the San Franciscos and the Berkeleys of the world as you're going through just looking for a customer, similarly how just taxi cabs work. You don't see that as much in Yountville because it's a more pedestrian-focused just method of travel. The National Resource Defense Council is currently performing a study at Cal Berkeley, really trying to pinpoint a bit more what the impacts of ride-sharing services have on pollution and congestion. And these findings of the study are expected to be released later this year. Town staff is going to be monitoring that, and if there's stuff worth sharing, of course, we will go on and share the results. Regarding driverless cars, which was also a more significant part of the conversation than one would expect, there's been not enough studies performed to know exactly how parking or congestion would be affected because it is such a new technology. It's expected, though, that the town would need to assign areas as designated drop-offs if this technology became more and more popular in town, just so you'd limit how many cars would stop in the middle of Washington Street or Yonge Street. Again,
We're so far
it's
from
so
that.
far from there, but
I
know
don't
that
see-
we are monitoring it, and town staff will be able to respond as we have more and more information.
Okay,
So, moving on to that.
yes.
The consensus for both the ZDRB and the town council was that use area for a business would trigger a parking requirement. Whether the use area is indoors or outdoors, regardless of what the use is, whether it's retail, wine tasting, restaurant, full service, limited service, if you're using the space, it would trigger the parking requirement. There's several businesses in town, however, that may have the potential to include portions of their open space in their use area without increasing staffing levels. There's the idea, of course, that more use area would result in more employees. But there might be some where that isn't necessarily the case. Staff believes there's merit in discussing and exploring use of a pilot program that would permit tasting rooms that have existing outdoor seating, limit the number of seats, like if they're going to add 12 or less to their existing open space, to use that area to conduct formal wine tastings without requiring additional parking if the business can prove that it does not result in additional employees. If the whole idea of that is saying you're going to have more employees, if they can prove to the town that they aren't doing more employees, but they want to use that extra space, that would give the town, during this pilot program, enough data to determine whether these parking requirements are valid or not. that's up for discussion. We aren't.
That's one thing you want to
Yeah,
start
we aren't
with. Okay.
necessarily proposing one or another. That's the first item for discussion. So this would benefit the town in several regards, though. First, we heard from this hospitality industry that guests frequently request this. Many say, oh, it's so nice outside, can I enjoy this outside? And because of the nature of the hospitality industry, it's to say, yeah, you're welcome to go do it, but you can only come and receive your drink inside, and then you can go outside and drink it again. Is that a burden that we'd want to place on our wine tasting rooms in town? So that's that. When outdoor areas are actively used, it actually encourages people to go afoot and explore and immerse themselves on the street. If you're sitting outside, you're more likely to walk around outside and explore that thing you've been looking at across the street the whole time while you were enjoying a tasting. So if this program begins, the town would have data to actually determine whether these parking standards make sense or not. So this potential program is really the big thing to discuss right now.
Okay.
And I would just share that we have a lot of businesses that would like to formally use their outdoor space, but they're restricted. So the whole idea of the pilot program is we might have to make some allowances where we're not getting all the parking that we would need per seat or by square foot, because we want people to use outdoor areas, that it's good for the town. But then we've got smaller businesses with a few tables and chairs outside. We have others that have a whole lot of space outside.
Mm-hmm.
So how would we extend this program to some, all? That's the question.
Okay. Is there a member of the public that would like to come up and speak? What happened? Okay.
Yet
Raise
is
your
the
hand.
key word he
Raise
keeps
your
saying.
hand when you would like to speak. So pilot program and sort of the issue of using the outdoor spaces to serve. Okay, thoughts? I have some.
Start.
I think a pilot program opens up the door for that becoming the new norm. I think if you pick somebody and say, okay, you can serve on your patio, we're going to watch you. First of all, who's watching, who's counting, who's verifying that they haven't added employees, who's verifying that they haven't added more service where they should have parking. And then, well, how come they get to do it? It becomes the new norm. And I don't think that would be a path that I would want to see anybody going down. And then my other thought following that is there's beautiful, highly desirable wineries like Hall that have a tasting room. And you go in there and you can taste around the table all you want. If you want to go to sit outside, there's 100 chairs outside. You have to take your wine out there. It's not unexpected that that's a normal level of service. They do not serve out there. You can take a bottle out, but you take your glass out and you wander around.
Right.
But it's not. I don't buy the guests are demanding this level of service. I think they're being asked to step, 20 steps back into the tasting room. I think it's wonderful to allow them to go sit outside, but I don't think there's any need to change the level of service, the number of employees.
I would just raise how Hall is distinguished from here in Yountville. Even though an ABC O2 license lets you buy a bottle, take it outside to consume it, you can't do that here in town. So you can't take your bottle to enjoy those 100 seats.
But you can take your glass of wine outside and sit on
With
the
the
patio.
tasting pour.
A 2-ounce pour
Yeah.
maximum, yeah.
Yeah,
Can't take a glass, you can't take a bottle. That's what's different.
but you can
here.
take a pour. Yeah, and that seems perfectly reasonable to me.
So, Stuart, what is their setup now that they're open?
They can do formal
Do they
tastings
serve
indoor.
outside?
No. Guests can take their wine, take a 2-ounce taste outside.
So Stuart's going back and forth between the tasting room, except for the high-level tastings, they're in the library, or they're under the
Yeah,
that
those are all
loggia,
indoor.
that
Yeah.
kind of open space.
Yeah.
Yeah, whether it's a public tasting or a private tasting, it's all occurring indoors because you need that back and forth with the wine educator on
Well,
what's
what about
happening.
the open space with the fireplace? Because they do tastings out there, is my
That's part of the
understanding.
building.
So that's included in their
Yeah.
FAR.
It's included in their use area.
Okay, that's included in their
It-
use area.
It may even be FAR, I couldn't answer that.
It has
Because
a,
it's
it has
part
a
of the
ceiling and
building,
it
yeah,
has,
the
yeah,
way.
I would
Yeah,
think.
it's on
Fixed
three,
massing.
two sides.
may.
It
I'm
has
not sure.
walls. Okay, but
Nathan.
so.
Either way, it
so
is
the-
for sure part of the use area, and
the
that's what we're
courtyard,
talking
You have
about.
to walk into the tasting room and back out pour by pour at Stuart.
If you wanted to sit out in the central courtyard
Patio
with
area.
nothing above you, yeah, you'd be limited to the 2-ounce pour, and if you wanted more, you'd have to go inside.
That's not the restriction for draw.
It
Yes, it
is.
is.
It is.
And it's the same for Priest Ranch.
not
It's
how
the
they do
same
it.
for
Yeah.
nearly all of the tasting rooms in town that
Okay.
have these outdoor
Outdoor
seating
areas.
areas.
Okay, that's interesting.
So why are we so focused only on the employee parking? Why is it the pilot program would be, if you don't have to hire another server, we'll let you do it? Because it seems like if, in Gerard's case, to be able to do table service on the deck would double their guest experience. And if they can get their server to do that, we, the town, still deal with more people coming.
So
Same with Jessup.
one of the major themes of the combined meeting, which is one of the reasons we wanted to bring this to you, was they kept saying employees are doing the parking impact. That was probably, of the 10 individuals there, 8 of them were saying, oh, it's the employees. And that was the impact that seemed they needed to control more than the guest parking. Because several even mentioned that a lot of the guests will park in one area and they'll walk them down, up and downtown, whether they're parking at the hotel they're staying at or parking somewhere else.
And I would add, by making a more active streetscape, we actually encourage that to happen because people do explore the tasting rooms on foot and they walk up and down the street.
But they're not invited, I mean, if they go and park behind Priest Ranch and taste, they're not welcome to leave their car at Priest Ranch and wander all the way down to Stuart Cellars. You know, I
That would
mean,
be
it's
between
not-
them and Priest
Yeah,
Ranch.
they're leaving it on
Yeah.
private property.
No, but everybody, like up at the north end of town, people are starting to put out signs. This is only R&D's parking, no parking for Chichio's. This is Chichio's parking, no parking for R&D. You know, that is starting to happen, that they're all saying, well, you can't park here and you can't park here. And they're getting possessive of their parking. So people are going to be driving up and down town, especially from one end to the other when there's nothing in the middle, to go tasting here and then drive in the car and then go tasting there. And
I think there's so much parking in Yountville. You just literally have to go. I mean, like, I've driven, when I drive to work sometimes, and I take Yon Street, everything between Yon Street and Washington is pretty much available. All the cross little streets are available. It might not look that way because employees really do park closest to Washington Street because they want to walk closest to Washington Street. But, like, if employee had to park like 2 blocks back, they would absolutely have no issue with parking. Is there any,
But those streets are full of cars. They're full
No,
of
I mean,
employee
like-
parking.
No. Yeah, the ones that are closest to Washington Street
Yeah,
are, yeah.
everything the
But
first
that's
block or
because
two.
they're coming closer to, like, I think if businesses said, this is where the employees need to park, like what
Yes.
you were saying, like if with, talking about you got to rent parking spaces or something, or businesses might have to rent parking spots, is that not true?
There's off-site parking.
Off-site, whatever. Yeah, I mean, like, I feel like the parking because of the open space and letting people taste at Gerard and how that impacts the employees, I mean, it doesn't have to, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Parking doesn't have to be an issue, the way that we make it seem like it's such an issue.
Well, I think it is an issue.
I think it's an issue because you have people that just park, I mean, you have people that literally work 10-hour shifts that take up a space
Yes,
in a
for
spot.
10 hours.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's the issue. It's
Right.
not because we have a lack of parking spaces. It's because the people that are parking in those spots are employees and they'll be there all day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it gets back to
But
employee
if you
parking.
said, right,
Which is why, again, with the pilot program idea, was if they can somehow prove that there's no additional employees,
But we're not monitoring where employees park or where they are.
For new businesses, we are.
Yeah, they are for the new ones.
We have an employee parking management plan that requires a certain number of employees to park on site, since the parking standard is meant to meet both employees and guests, but then to establish off-site parking locations, and we issue hanging stickers and do monitoring.
But
of
those
that.
are only with new businesses.
Or whenever you come
Are
in
you-
for a change.
We just talked about Bellagio and Vintage.
They
So
will fall
getting
under
more and
This
that.
more-
would be
I think
triggered.
we have about 10 businesses enrolled in the
Okay.
program.
And what would the study do? Let's say the pilot program went into effect, what data would you expect to get from it, and who would get that data, and how much would it cost?
It wouldn't so much be the formal study as much as it would be the trends. Are we noticing a clear change in congestion? Like, oh man, we allowed the use of the deck up there in Girard and it is twice as
Wild.
busy as it was before. Or we might say, oh, nothing has changed at all.
Right.
That would help us get an idea.
How do we notice that? What empirical data do we get? Because if you replace us with the 5 council members, you get 5 opinions on whether there's a parking problem or not.
Yeah, we all do our opinions right now.
So,
Like there's a problem.
I mean, I guess what do we hope to get from it that is truly helpful to our analysis?
And there isn't a control group because so many of these places are already doing it, and when they're not supposed to be. You can't start with Girard and tell them to do it and compare it to what it was before because they're already serving out there.
Well,
That's not what you wanted to see.
There have been code enforcement actions taken on properties that are in violation of their use permits. And some respond more quickly than others, and some involve attorneys more often than others. But the enforcement does occur, and we
like
have
settlement
seen,
agreement.
yeah, and we have seen responses.
I would.
So if you see things like that, we would like to know.
I'm all in favor of trying any sort of program to help our businesses out in the community. I mean, if they
Yeah.
can put more people in their chairs, good for them.
But how's,
I mean, by telling them you can't use, and I'm looking at this from my old hat at masonry, people would leave if we said you had to sit indoors for your wine tasting. They're like, no, you have this garden outside. I want to sit out there, or I'm going to go somewhere else. It wasn't a matter of, It wasn't a matter of, oh, okay, that's taken. We'll just hang out upstairs. It was, we're here because it's California, it's sunny, we want to be outside, and we want to have a good experience. And whenever those pours are just an ounce and a half, you're going to be getting up and doing aerobics more than you are tasting wine. I think we're hurting our businesses by not letting them utilize their outdoor space for the use of their business.
Who is being limited right now with the outdoor space issue?
I believe R&D is limited in what they can serve outdoors, correct?
R&D has a few tables near their
Right,
bar,
right.
and then they have a whole bunch of chairs.
Right.
The tables by their bar are outdoor bar areas. They can serve there. The chairs are where there's DG
Right.
is just open space for that entire complex. It's
Right.
not R&D's. It's
It's the open
everyone's.
space thing, right?
Yeah,
So you're not supposed to serve there for the DG area?
correct.
That's not happening.
But also for R&D, though, I think it's a staffing issue, though. I don't think they want to, they're okay
Yeah,
with
okay.
doing it. Yeah. So who doesn't have that ability, who wants it? Is
I
that-
believe Jessup wants to pour outside. This is just me guessing.
The tasting rooms that have open space, or public, outdoor space.
Yes.
Everyone knows that, okay.
Yeah.
So, I understand what you're saying, and I agree. Now, my supposition is Maisonnerie, somehow in their use permit, they linked to the parking to be able to use that space. No. Okay, so they technically should not be pouring outside. Is that
That's what I
correct?
believe, yes.
Okay. So my proposal would be, any business that wants to use its outdoor space, let them use it, but they have to abide by our parking requirements.
Either they have to pay the fee or they have to find the space
But then you have
and let them
to,
use it.
They get on the new employee parking management plan if they want to use their outdoor space to serve.
so where are you going to add all these parking spaces?
Right. That's the question.
The
That-
first spot
you
is
can't
in
do that if
front
you
of
don't
Karen
have the
Lazar's
spaces.
driveway.
That's already being taken by the employee from Redwood.
Uh-huh. But you can't go there until you
Sure,
solve the
part-time.
parking problem.
Well, what that means is that our businesses can't use their outdoor spaces formally, that once a year when we follow up with them on their use permit monitoring, they make assurances to us that may or may not be true. We may be following up on a code complaint, and
Right.
they'll promise that they'll comply, but then I think what happens, happens. And even with our best efforts and what we think is a positive working relationship with our businesses, you know,
But do you impose fines or just warning? Obviously, you got to
We
have
do.
teeth in your
There's
enforcement.
a ladder.
we do.
Okay.
You start off with, did you know this is a violation? And then second, hey, you got to stop. And then it will lead to fines.
But what I've heard
Okay.
here tonight is that one of the ones where we levied a significant fine, we entered into a settlement agreement and have assurances that they'll never do it again, may be one of those that are using it. So, so even with those measures in place, I can't be certain.
Well,
Can
then
you-
what
can you-
about, and let me say, we only have a part-time code enforcement officer, and we have a volunteer parking enforcement person, and it's really not fair to ask staff to be our code enforcement people. That's my personal opinion. So when we talk about enforcement, no reflection on you guys at all, because you have day jobs.
Curtis, though.
Curtis. Give that man a book. So, we've talked about the parking plan is, if you can't make parking, then you pay us $1,500 and we find parking, or whatever the fee is. I pull that out of the air. So if we say to businesses, Jessup, you want to use your patio, that's 3 or 4 more parking spaces you owe us, you can either find those somewhere or you can give us the money and we will find them. Is the town prepared to do that?
We will quickly run out of our supply if we do that.
So we really aren't prepared as a town to increase parking supply.
If they can't do it on site, then we will quickly run out.
So that
So that might
sort of
answer
answers
the
its own
not
question.
to
Yeah.
pilot program.
Yeah.
That answers.
So
Well, the enforcement obviously is a big deterrent. Can you cancel their usage if they violate 3 times or something like that? They will take it away permanently.
Following fees, one possible penalty is revocation of a use permit.
Right.
Luckily, it hasn't gotten there yet. but-
Right. I don't think many of them want to risk that.
Seems like that's a simple, obvious solution.
Okay, so I'm feeling no on the pilot program because
It makes sense to.
It's hard to enforce. Yeah.
because it's hard to verify whether they've
Right.
added extra employees or not.
And because we don't
It's not
get
trackable.
empirical data, but
Yeah.
I would like to find a way for businesses to use their outdoor space. Because I don't think the public feels it's public space. I do think it's nice when you walk through town, whether you park at one end and drive to the other and do it, you know, a bifurcated trip. It's nice to see activity out.
Yeah.
I mean, I would be interested and invested in finding a way to do it, but we're gonna have to find more land for parking somehow.
Right.
It sounds as the bottom line.
The other thing to consider too is if you do open this up, then you do have to do it for everybody. And maybe in some sort of scope based off of their existing permit or use permit, you know, like what he was saying with the limited number of seats or 12 or less or 6 or less, depending on your square footage. But the other thing to consider though is if, you know, from a traffic standpoint, like, we're looking at it from a parking standpoint. How are we looking at this from a traffic standpoint? Are we looking at this from a pedestrian traffic standpoint? Like, I mean, it's just something to consider. I mean, during the weekends, especially as we get into high season, I mean, literally there are people walking in the middle of the streets because there's no space for them to be walking on the sidewalks. What happens when we let 20 or 10 tasting rooms open up 6 seats or more? You know what I mean? It's not just a parking impact.
No.
It's a pedestrian walking impact. I mean, Bouchon literally is where people are like standing in the middle of the road.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
truly.
There's a point
And
where
that's-
enough is
there's,
enough.
There's some things we have
Yeah.
to weigh in addition to parking.
And I think we haven't even touched on that point. I don't even know if we can touch on that point. Is probably the number one attraction to Yountville, and what there's a line and more people and more covers every single day is Bouchon. And how many parking spots do they have?
0.
None
The
on
bakery.
site.
None on site.
They
And
Edward James Courtyard.
Oh, they do from the back, Edward James, and then over by the school, I noticed.
Okay.
so I don't know. For me, it's if we're going to limit the other businesses from using outdoor space. I mean, it's the same thing as having a line to sit down at a restaurant almost. Yeah.
That,
We're good.
believe it or not, did give us what we needed.
Will you be, so you'll be writing an ordinance?
So now, what we could do,
Will we see a draft?
mainly the parking isn't going to really be touched at all, other than if it's outdoor use, it will trigger a parking requirement. That seems to be the consensus. Plus everything we discussed regarding the definitions of open space and FAR, they will be, I'll consolidate all this information and put it in an ordinance. Would the board like to see said ordinance before it goes to the town council, or was the
Yes.
conversation here enough?
I would like to see it. Anybody else?
Sure.
I think we should see it.
Yes.
Okay. We'll do that.
Okay, thanks. Were there any staff reports or anything? Yeah.
Oh,
we're
yeah.
not done yet. We're not done
Appoint
yet,
a
are
second
we?
member
Oy,
to the
oy,
2
oy,
by
oy.
2 committee.
And election of chair
Yeah.
and vice chair.
We're
Oh,
not
right,
done.
sorry,
So-
I'm out of order.
I gotta find my agenda.
Oh, I thought we were done.
No, we're not done.
Oh, you got probably 4 more hours.
I know. Okay. We have the election of a chair and a vice chair.
All right. Not a big staff report for this. Just
Nope.
every year we need to elect a chair and a vice chair. So go at it.
Well, it's time to do it again. I would nominate Carrie, but she's not going to be here very long.
We have one member on the dais. We'll be meeting on different nights of the month.
When does that start?
December 6th will be my first town council meeting, and I have talked to Steve Rogers, and my intention, unless you all want me to resign earlier so you can go ahead and appoint, is to resign effective the end of our November meeting. But if you guys want to go ahead and start the process, I can leave earlier, so just, I'm flexible.
Well, I think
Nope.
you
You're going
can,
to talk to her about that?
you can submit your intention to resign on that date, which can allow us to start the recruitment to fill the position.
Okay, great. I will do that then. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good.
Would you like to be the chair again?
I will. Will you be the vice chair?
I thought. Did you raise your hand?
No.
I move that Kim be the chair and Mikhail be the vice chair.
I'll second that.
Second.
That'll work.
That's how it happens.
Man.
Did we take public comment on that?
No.
It's actually not a cited public hearing. And cited, noticed.
All right. That one's done.
So ad hoc, ready?
Okay. So now, appoint members to the General Plan Ad Hoc Committee. This may seem like Groundhog Day because we did it last month.
Thought we just did.
We
We
did.
did, but it was-
However, there is one member of the General Plan Ad Hoc Committee who will no longer be able to sit on that committee starting the first council meeting in December.
Can we nominate the new guy?
The
Yet to be named?
You know he's a guy.
Well,
the
can
new
we-
person?
We're trying to get somebody in the seat.
I mean, she will fill that role until we get a new person, depending on that person. They might be qualified.
It's
do
possible, if it is the will of the board to push this
Yes.
decision
you wanna
until
do?
December, that's possible.
Do you want to do it?
I really cannot.
I cannot.
Okay.
I
So-
don't have
Kind
to.
of
push to
stretch the whole thing
December?
right now.
We will push.
All right.
You guys would make good punters. Great.
Okay,
That is all.
now, I would like to move that we adjourn the meeting.
I would second that very.
And everyone's in favor, I guarantee it.
Wonderful.
Great.